meeting. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Jonna Pro, and I'm the spokeswoman to the State House Appropriations Committee. We have been traveling around the Commonwealth since January, educating our citizens about the state budget, the status of our state budget, and bringing people on board to help us work through the fiscal crisis that we're in. This is actually our second trip to Scranton. We were here in January, very early on in the process, and we want to thank Representative Murphy for inviting us back today. I have to apologize that Chairman Evans could not be with you because we are just a few days away from the end of June. He is tied up in Harrisburg and in Philadelphia, both trying to do budget negotiations. But we have with us today Miriam Fox, who is the Executive Director of the House Appropriations Committee, and probably the single person in Pennsylvania who knows more about the budget than anybody else. So she's going to spend some time bringing everybody up to speed about how we got into the financial crisis that we're in, talk a little bit about the proposal the governor had made in February and how that changed over the last 3 months, and what our revenue situation looks like right now. We've got some charts in the room. You also have them in your hand. You also have financial statements that she'll briefly go through with you, so you have a good understanding of what Representative Murphy and the other legislators are facing as we try to get through this budget crisis. So again, I want to thank you for having us all here to Scranton, and without further ado, I will introduce Representative Murphy. Kevin?
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Jonna. We've been joined by Representative Ken Smith, and I want to acknowledge Ken. I appreciate Ken attending here this afternoon. But most importantly, I want to thank everyone in attendance here today for coming forth and bringing your concerns about this year's budget to the forefront. You know, having this in a public forum, televised, will give everyone a better chance to understand the current economic situation here in Pennsylvania, and also it will give them an opportunity to listen to people from different organizations that are very worthwhile organizations. Many of these organizations Pennsylvania cannot do without. More importantly, this year than ever, Pennsylvania has to prioritize its spending within this budget plan. And I'm here today in a conversational way to discuss with you the problems of Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania's economy, and also to address concerns that you may have regarding the budget. As I mentioned earlier, priorities are very important. So I'm here today to listen to your priorities, listen to your concerns, and bring those concerns back to Harrisburg and discuss those concerns as this budget process unfolds over the next several weeks. And I want everyone to realize that this is a fluid process. February 4th, the governor proposed a budget. A short time ago, approximately a month ago, the Senate introduced their budget, Senate Bill 850, which was extremely drastic. Cuts across the board, cuts for programs that are essential to Pennsylvanians, to the vulnerable Pennsylvanians, the children, the elderly, and the disadvantaged. And we have to try to rectify that and try to come to a delicate balance of being responsible and providing services. And that's why I'm here to listen to you today. Thank you very much for attending, and I would like to ask Representative Smith if he would like to say a few words to come up before the presentation begins. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. And it's great to be here today, but you're not here to listen to me, I'm sure, and a few words it will be, in just a few words. But as Kevin said, this is the beginning of a very fluid and long process. And as I look around, I see schools of higher education are here. We have hospitals here. We have ARC. We have neighborhood association, neighborhood housing. And everybody in this room here today will be affected by the budget. And where do we go? And at what point do we cut services and hurt those most vulnerable among us? And I could tell you Senate Bill 850 is almost immoral to what it does to those most vulnerable among us. But at the same time, The fact is, we face a deficit in this Commonwealth of more than $3 billion. And unfortunately for us, on the state level, we can't bring forward a deficit. We have to plug that hole. And how do we do it? Tough, tough decisions must be made. And I believe that we have to cut the fat and cut and cut and cut until we get to the point where you can't cut anymore, and then see what that gap may be or may not be. And I'm talking about, you know, we have a rainy day fund, we have stimulus money, we have all of those kind of things that have to be put into the budget. What is the gap that's left, if there is one? And then we have to make the tough decisions. But let me tell you, for all of you that are here today, that understand that you have a population that needs to be heard by Pennsylvania, that they are the vulnerable among us, whether we're talking about our children, we're talking about our seniors, we're talking about Department of Public Welfare, whatever it may be, that population, you are their voice, and you need to be heard, and you do that by communication, and that's what I urge you to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Representative Smith. And our guests from the Appropriations Office in Harrisburg, they have a limited time to be here today. And I'm very happy to have Jonna Pro here and Miriam Fox here to help us out and help explain the current budget situation that we face as Pennsylvanians. And in order to be expedient and make sure they're able to cover everything that they have to cover in a short period of time, I'd like to introduce Miriam Fox at the present time so she could explain the current budget situation here in Pennsylvania. Miriam?
Thank you. It's certainly a very difficult time for us. In our office, this is a very unusual year. We've taken a long, hard look at the budget. We have analysts in our office that cover every area of the budget and have been taking a very detailed look at what the need is in terms of the agencies that serve Pennsylvania, in terms of the programs that we provide Pennsylvania. And I can tell you right now unequivocally that the cuts that we have to do in order to balance this budget are going to affect every one of you in this room today, every one of your neighbors. In some way, they will have an impact on all of our lives. It's not an easy year. It's a year that we all find pretty awesome, and in not a good way, and we have a lot of work to do in terms of finding the balance that we've talked about here this afternoon. I'd like to talk just a little bit about how we got here so that you can kind of understand why we're here today. And I'd like to talk just a little bit about what the cash flow needs of the Commonwealth are and the ways that we're looking at going about fixing the problem. And I'm going to actually, you have here in your chairs a financial statement. I'm going to actually bore you with a little bit of detail because I think that the people of Pennsylvania deserve that detail, and often we're criticized for not providing you with the kind of detail that you need to understand the problem, so we're going to do that. And then finally, we're going to talk just a little bit about the environment and where we go from here. When we started the budget year this year, our fiscal year begins in July and it ends in June. And when we started this year, we were looking at economic growth for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in the positive range. GDP, for example, nationally was expected to be primarily positive throughout the year. We were looking at perhaps a small dip, negative growth in the fourth quarter of 2008, but that turned out to be a lot worse than that. And we actually are seeing negative growth rates in terms of -5%, -6%. And now we're even looking at a small negative growth rate in the second quarter of 2009. And we all know from the news and from the things that we've seen on television and in the papers, we know the economy really tanked. Internationally, nationally, we're in the same situation as a lot of other states. Some other states have it far worse, and I can't imagine being them because I consider what we have right now pretty bad. So When we look at the upcoming fiscal year, we look at economic indicators like gross domestic product, and we use those economic indicators to forecast the income that we're going to get into the state, the taxes, the cash flow that will come in. You know, we get taxes from personal income, from sales tax, those are the two big ones. And we sit back and we run models that tell us, based on those economic indicators, what is it that we're going to see in Pennsylvania in the upcoming year. And because we were looking at primarily positive growth, our cash flow looked primarily positive, the income that we're receiving. And obviously, the economy tanked. It was something that nobody expected. I think it was a shock to everyone. I don't think any economist really predicted how bad it was going to be. And so today, we're looking at a $3.2 billion shortfall in terms of revenue. That's the income coming into the state for the current fiscal year, for the year that runs from beginning July 2008 to June of 2009. The story is that in February, when the governor released his budget, we were only looking at $2.3 billion. So gradually, things have continued to get worse until we're now $1 billion later, and that's just for this year. What I don't think most people understand is we talk about that $3.2 billion shortfall, but that shortfall also translates to next year. That means that our revenue base, the income that we're getting in, is a similar amount lower in the upcoming year. So we really are looking at a shortfall across both years of $5 to $6 billion. Now we've cut. When the governor introduced his budget in February, he proposed almost $500 million worth of cuts in the current year. The growth in terms of programs for next year reflected more cuts. And yet again, just a few days ago, he released another $500 million in cuts that he asked his cabinet to find. That's $1.5 billion worth of cuts that we're already looking at. It's pretty dramatic. You've heard about Senate Bill 850. That bill reflected dramatic cuts. It's still $1 billion out of balance. That bill is a bill that we feel we can't live with. But even if you could live with it, we still have to find another $1 billion worth of cuts if we're going to live within the income that's coming into our state.
Excuse me, Mary, but we want to remind everybody that's billion with the B, not with an M. So those are big, very, very big dollars that Mary's discussing.
And I know it's hard to kind of get your mind around billions of dollars, but let me put it this way. Our revenue stream this year is literally below where we were at 4 years ago. So if you think about your own income and you think about where you were at 4 years ago, that's where the state's at. It's very unusual. I don't think I've seen, well, I haven't. I haven't seen anything like that since I've worked there, and I went through the 1991 recession, which was not a very positive experience, but it's even worse than that. So here we are today. You can look at the charts, and they kind of tell you a little bit about how cash flow has proceeded throughout the year. The revenue shortfall, you'll see each month became worse. I'm going to pull this mic out here so I can kind of look. If you look at, oh, I guess it doesn't walk with me. Well, if you look at where we were at back in June, you see that the monthly deficit was, if you could, yeah, tip it so I can see the numbers. There we go. Thank you. So this particular chart starts in November, so that's where I'll start in November, but it's gotten progressively worse since June. In November, we were $657 million below the estimate. That grew to $814 in December. By the time the governor introduced his budget in February, the orange bar, we were $1.3 billion under estimate. 1.6 in March, which is one of our biggest months for collecting tax revenue. And so we anxiously awaited April, hoping that things might improve, but they didn't. And by the end of April, we were at $2.6 billion. And then finally, at the end of May, we're at $2.8 billion, and we expect we're going to reach $3.2 billion by the end of this month. Now, if you take a step back and kind of look at what we spend our money at in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have a large operating budget in terms of the general fund. It had been expected to be over $28 billion this year, but right now, with a shortfall, it's obviously going to be a lot less than that. Our whole operating budget, including the general fund and other funds that we use in Pennsylvania probably gets us to over $50 billion, but the general fund is the biggest one. The other funds, just real quickly, that we also have a concern about are the motor license fund that takes care of our highways and bridges, the lottery fund, which pays for a lot of our senior programs, and then there's a small slice of other funds. The general fund is the one that funds most of the programs that you're familiar with, like medical assistance, our schools. Those are two of the biggest areas. And so if you look at the pie chart here on the left, you'll notice that out of a total of almost $28 billion anticipated after the budget freezes that the governor announced in February, we're looking at about 35% that would be spent on education, about 7% on higher education, medical assistance or health care, 19%, that's the kind of dark pink slice, and the light pink slice is other DPW and human service programs. And then finally, we have about 6% of the budget spent on corrections, and then there's 12% that is kind of lumped in with everything else. The reason I show this chart here is because I think it's easy to see that if we're going to find billions of dollars in savings, the places that it's going to impact the most are going to be education and DPW programs, medical assistance, which affects to a very dramatic degree our senior citizens. We often hear a lot about welfare in Harrisburg, and when people are looking for budget cuts, they want us to find savings in welfare. Ironically, a third of the population that medical assistance serves is seniors. It's not what you typically consider welfare people. And of that third of the population, they take up 2/3 of the cost. So 2/3 of medical assistance costs pays for the seniors and the disabled, and only 5 to 6% of the entire DPW budget pays for what you typically think of as TANF recipients or welfare people. So when we're talking about cutting, we go to medical assistance and other DPW programs and education to find the billions of dollars of money, and we find that it impacts our seniors the most and it impacts our kids the most. If we cut education, generally those costs just get passed down to the local districts, and we end up with increases in property taxes. So it's not, there comes a point where you just can't cut anymore. It doesn't make any sense to cut anymore, and we feel that that's the point that we've reached after the $1.5 billion we've taken out. We don't feel it's responsible to go as far as $850 has gone. We think those cuts are irresponsible. And finally, even if you did $850, remember, we're still $1 billion short there and would have to go more. Actually, some say it's as high as $1.5 billion. Depends whose numbers you're using. And so if you want to just follow this through on the financial statement that I provided to you, you'll see on line 5 the revenue adjustment of $3.2 billion for the fiscal year 08-09. That's the year that we're in right now. And that's the number that, as I said earlier, came up, has increased from $2.3 billion. If you look a little farther down on line 10, there's something that is a technical term called refund reserves.
I just want to make sure everyone's on the same page here. We're looking at line 5 here, in the red, 3.2 billion.
Right. So another area that's taken a huge hit is our tax refunds. We've had to pay out more tax refunds than we normally would because people's incomes haven't been as high as they normally have been, and so it's far exceeded the amount that we'd, by about $100 million this year and $100 million next year, the amount we'd normally anticipate. And then finally, there are other expenses that have come on board because people are unemployed, and because the ripple effect that happens as a result of that, the programs that we have to pay in order to provide some support in terms of unemployment and health care, those costs have come up. So we've had to go back now and increase spending for the current year and try and offset that with this additional $500 million cuts that the governor has recently proposed. The bottom line on this sheet here is that with all of that, and with all of the revenue-raising proposals that the governor proposed in February, things like increasing the cigarette tax, other tobacco taxes, he proposed an assessment on MCOs, he proposed using all of the rainy day fund, he proposed several fund transfers that give us some additional help. But even with all of that, we still end up, if we carry that through till next year, with a $1.5 billion deficit. So we've looked to cuts, we've looked to increased efficiencies, we have looked to transfers from funds that, our savings account for a rainy day. We've looked to other areas where we can squeeze every penny we can out of it, and we still have at least a $1.5 billion deficit in the budget year, and that's with very slow growth. That's with very mediocre program, keeping it as low as we possibly can. And even then, we still have a $1.5 billion deficit. I just want to remind you that we're not the only state that has this problem. You've heard a lot about California, you've heard a lot about other states, and the bottom line is, I think today, that we really have to consider increases in revenues. Now, the governor has proposed a 0.5% increase in the personal income tax, and believe me, that's not an easy thing for anyone to do, and I think he's put it off until he can't any longer, and I think as he saw the numbers developing on the bottom line of the financial statement that you're looking at right now, he finally decided that he had to make that kind of a proposal. It's one that the members in the General Assembly take very seriously, and they're very worried because it's difficult to raise taxes in a time when the economics are so poor. I think the reason, some of the thoughts that the governor had behind the proposal that he made were that a tax on personal income is at least a tax on people that are employed. If he looked to the sales tax to increase sales taxes, then everybody pays it. We do have a special exemption for people who are at lower income levels. For example, a family of 4 earning $32,000 pays no income taxes. We have a very generous exemption in the personal income tax that also affects seniors. Most seniors don't pay taxes on retirement income. There are some exceptions. And as a result of the fact that you don't count retirement income in the poverty exemption when you look to see how much you qualify for, a lot of seniors fall under that program. So all in all, it seemed that the personal income tax was one of the better alternatives from his standpoint. He's also asked that we suspend the rate reduction in something called the capital stock franchise tax. That's a tax on companies, businesses. He's not asking that we increase the tax, but it was scheduled to go out of existence in a couple years, and he's asking that we wait 3 years. The bottom line is he's asking for a temporary increase in the personal income tax until 2012 and a temporary suspension of the business tax, which is the capital stock franchise tax, until the same year. This will help to close that gap, and I think I provided you on the second page a financial statement that shows those numbers and how they spread through. And if you look at the bottom line, you'll see that by the time we get out of fiscal year 2009-10, we still have to find another $33 million, but I assume we're going to find that in cuts. It brings us at least even. It's a difficult decision to make. It's one that we want to hear back from you about. We, quite frankly, don't know where else to go. And I can tell you that in our office, we've done the numbers, we've crunched them. I've spent many hours with our analysts struggling over these financial statements, and I really don't know where else we go myself. It's something that the members of the General Assembly are going to have to make up their mind on, and I think they need to hear back from you and what you think.
Mary, can we just go back to the pie chart for one minute and just point out to everyone, as Mary had said, we often hear, we want to see the programs cut, but the important piece of the pie chart to look at is that green slice of the pie. With the exception of education, our health and human service programs, and corrections, everything else in the state is funded by that other little 12% piece of the pie, that $3.5 billion. That's all of your libraries, all of your state parks, your historic and museum commission, the entire legislature, workforce training, any other thing that you can think of other than education or health and welfare programs is in this little piece of the pie. So the point is, we could cut all of that out. That could all go away, and there still isn't enough money. Or as Representative Mandarino who is one of our committee members, put it, I think, in the caucus meeting, and to some folks she was meeting with. You know, if you're a historic and museum commission member, or you support workforce training, or any of those wonderful programs, what does it feel like to be the fat in the budget? There really isn't any fat left in the budget. And maybe Miriam can address that even a little bit further.
Well, I can say that some of the actions that we've taken over the last several years, particularly the Rendell administration, he's implemented a number of management and productivity improvements that I'd just like to tell you a little bit about that have saved the state nearly $3 billion over the past 4 years. Things like $242 million due to employee complement reduction. In other words, he's been able to cut back on jobs primarily through attrition. Right now, the cuts that we're looking at into the next year, we're actually going to have to start laying people off. He's saved $643 million as a result of contract renegotiations with the agencies, finding more efficient ways of doing things. $489 million due to operational and process improvements, and $57 million from technology, information technology implementation. That's statewide, and he's done a number of things within the Department of Public Welfare. Well, first of all, let me talk statewide. The number of positions in state agencies has actually declined by 3.4%, or over 2,600 positions. Within DPW itself, employees have been reduced by 1,100. I mean, this has an impact on people's lives too. When you're talking, we're laying people off. Those employees then have to go on unemployment next year, but we have been able to at least make government more efficient. It's a double-edged sword. We make government more efficient and we lay people off. The number of institutional workforce, including closures from state mental hospitals and state mental retardation centers, has been reduced by 1,700. And I could go on. There's a whole list of savings. We really have been working at finding increased efficiencies. The other thing I'd like to just talk about really quickly that I didn't talk very much about when I was looking at the financial statement, if you look at that statement on lines 30 through 32, you'll see the federal fiscal relief money. That too is a double-edged sword. If we didn't have that federal fiscal relief money, we would be another $2.5 billion in the red. Unfortunately, that money only lasts for 3 years, and you can see for 2008-9, the one year we're in, for 2009-10, the year we're about to start, and then finally in 2010-11, we have $1.9 billion. Once 10-11 is gone, once that fiscal year is over, we have another $2 billion problem to deal with. So we don't just have a problem this year. Federal fiscal relief comes in and helps us out for a few years, and then that's gone. It gives us some time to think about the future, but it's not a pretty picture. And, you know, politicians aren't used to thinking in the long term. But this time around, we all are forced to think in the long term because the federal money is just going to be gone in a few years, and we need to make sure that we phase in those cuts as easily as we can. So it's not going to be just this year. Anybody have questions? I'd be happy to answer them. I don't know it all, but if I don't have the answer, I can get it back to you. Yes.
Could you please state the abbreviation?
I just wanted to ask anyone that has a question to provide us with your name. In the event that we can't answer that question, I won't be able to get back to you. But I also want to take notes and make sure that the answers are directed the right way.
Can we get folks to come up to the microphone too, because I think that will help the person video, correct? Thank you. There's a microphone over here as well.
Chester Gillespie, Pennsylvania State Research. I just want a clarification on the abbreviation CSFT.
Capital stock franchise tax. That's a tax that I talked about we would look to suspend perhaps. I think one of the interesting things, well, it's interesting from an academic perspective, it has an impact on real lives. Recessions tend to be shorter than their actual recovery periods. And if you look back at recessions on average since 1960, the average duration for a recession is about 10.7 months. We're already into a year and a half almost of recession. So we far exceeded the average. But beyond that, it takes a while to recover. And on average, for all of those recessions, it's taken at least 50 months, about 4 years to recover from the recession to the point where we're back to employment growth where we used to be. The high, in terms of time of recovery, was actually happened during the recession of 1980. It took 83 months to recover. So we have a while before we're out of the woods. Yes.
My name's Diana Stotzman, and I'm the director of SCOLA Volunteers for Literacy. And this is I'm a citizen question. It has nothing to do with literacy. I seem to remember a couple of years ago, and I don't remember details because I'm not in government, but I do seem to remember reading in the paper something about several years ago, the Congress passed a pension plan for either state employees or teachers or something while things were really rolling, and then that stopped, and the payment was now going to have to come from not investments but out of our pockets. And I seem to recall that was a rather severe change in things.
Right.
Has that changed? Can that be reduced?
Well, actually, there was a change to people's pensions for state employees and for the public school employees back during the Rich Schweiker administration. We were getting to the point where it was still going to be tough in the out years. It was going to be a significant increase, but it was very much ameliorated because of the income that we had received from investments. But this year, when the stock market tanked, investment losses happened to people across the board. They also happened to the retirement systems. So that's had a very big impact. And as a result, we're looking at a huge spike in, I think, 2012-13, so our fiscal year 2012-13. We can't do anything about it retroactive. Constitutionally, we can't violate a contract that we've promised to someone. Going forward, prospectively, you can change things, but it's not going to address the fiscal issues that we're facing now because it's a very long range. You can only do it for employees that are new coming into the system. You can't change it for employees that are already there. And so any savings would happen in a good 10 years out. They won't dramatically impact us now.
Miriam, we also want to mention today, you spoke a little bit about the history of recessions. And when we talk about the temporary tax increase that the governor has proposed, historically speaking, that is how Pennsylvania has responded in times of economic need. Governor Thornburg increased the PIT and then rolled it back. It was actually written into law. As you know, Governor Thornburg was hardly a liberal. Governor Casey, who was no liberal either, also took that very action during a recessionary period. He raised the PIT, it was written into law, and then it was rolled back. Governor Ridge fortunately got out of town before he had to deal with a financial crisis, but Governor Schweiker raised the gas tax and then raided the rainy day fund to the tune of $1 billion, which essentially left the state broke. So we point that out, though, just so people understand that historically speaking, in difficult economic times, our response in Pennsylvania has been to raise that PIT just a small amount, get through the rough economic time, and then roll it back. And maybe Miriam can even add some more details to that.
Well, John is right. We did that in 1983, and then we did it again in 1991. In 1991, we actually established a surtax, a small increase that went away after a certain period of time, and that's how we drafted the legislation initially. We're focusing on cuts just as much as we are the revenue side of things. These conversations tend to kind of draw more interest on the tax side, I think, but I really want to emphasize that we're all trying to work to find savings before we decide ultimately what the tax increase might be if we're going to go in that direction.
My name is Brian Boylan. I'm a taxpayer in the city of Scranton. First of all, I'd like to commend Kevin on the nice job he did with the Scranton School for the Deaf. And it seems like every time a governor goes out of office, we get a tax increase or a scare that something is going to happen, and we have to take some desperate measures here. With the people who are going to lay off the state, supposedly, he'll have to pay unemployment compensation in addition to losing all the people and the services that they provide us. What is going to be done about this? It seems to be, you know, a black hole, that nothing's happening. Nothing seems to be done. They try to make some changes, and everything seems to be going incorrectly. Is it just mismanagement on the government's part, on the state's part, or what is it? She mentioned the fund. You mentioned the fund every time. What, 91 and 98 or something like that? The taxes were raised temporarily, and nothing happens. It's a big circus, really.
Well, I think after the 1991 tax increase, we went, within a couple of years, that was during the Clinton administration at the national level, we came back to a very strong economic resurgence, and we did very well for a very long time. And then I think it was towards the end of the 90s, I'm trying to remember exactly when, July 1990 to March 1991, we hit another recession which affected us economically, and we had to take some actions then. That was then the Ridge-Schweiker administration. And then in 2001, we had a short-lived recession, another 8-month recession. But we did spring back after 1991. We had some very good economic times. This isn't just Pennsylvania. It's not just us. I think it's fair to say it's the world and, you know, internationally.
So why is it? Are we taking the pride in that it's not just Pennsylvania, it's everybody? Or don't we take measures to look at these things in the future? What's going to happen in the future? It seems to be total mismanagement by the state and how they do things.
Miriam, if I can jump in here, one of the issues that Chairman Evans has been raising for several sessions of the legislature is the idea that we have reached the time where we as citizens need to have a constitutional convention. We have not had one in 40 years in Pennsylvania, and we do need to look at the things that you're talking about, our taxing structure, how we do policy, some of the big, broad issues that really impact our budget. For example, I'll throw this one out because it's one that people are familiar with. We can't, and correct me if I'm wrong, Miriam, but we can only use the gas tax for roads. We can't use the gas tax at all for any sort of public transportation. That's correct.
That's correct.
So whether you agree with that or not is not the point. It's those are the kinds of issues that we should be looking at as Pennsylvanians in a constitutional convention. Unfortunately, Dwight has not been able to garner any support for that, not only in the legislature, but among the public as well, because we have a complicated process for doing that here in Pennsylvania under our Constitution. But we believe, and Chairman Evans believes, that it is time that we do that, and you make a very good point by raising that. So it's not mismanagement, but we've reached an era where we do need to really look at our governmental structure. And the process for that is a constitutional convention.
The gas tax, of course, had to be tremendous last year with the price of gasoline. And was that money put into the highways and that?
Yes.
Was that money intended to
Yes.
be put in the highways and that?
Yes.
It was so huge and astronomical that we should have fantastic roads in Pennsylvania yet. I think that Pennsylvania was voted the worst roads in the country, if I'm not mistaken, with all the gas tax that were collected.
I don't know if Pennsylvania's voted the worst in the nation. I know I certainly hear complaints here and there, but I also know that the amount of money that it costs, for example, to just build a bridge or to fix a bridge is pretty astronomical these days. And traditionally, we haven't gone into debt in Pennsylvania in order to do those things, even though when you look at the life of an asset, the life of a road is over, it's a long-lived asset, just like your house is a long-lived asset. And perhaps you could argue that it's appropriate to use debt service to pay for long-lived assets to bridge those issues. But quite frankly, we don't have enough money to provide the kinds of roads and bridges that we should provide. But that's not an area we're trying to just maintain the status quo right now and get through, because we don't want to pass on any additional costs than we have to right now because people are suffering. So we're trying to maintain a balance.
I'd like to ask Kevin a question.
Mr. Boylan, I just wanted to mention one thing, and this is what I've been hearing from the governor and hearing from my colleagues down down in Harrisburg, is that with the funding for education, and education in particular, they don't want to impose mandates on local school districts, which are going to raise local property owners' property taxes. And I think that's one of the reasons that they're trying to address the education funding as they are today. And if you'd like to elaborate on that, Marion, I think that's significant.
Well, I mean, part of the progress that has been made under the current administration is that we've been able to put more money into our schools, and it's helped to offset property tax increases at the local level. If we cut back too far now, we lose any ground that we've gained. Senate Bill 850, for example, takes the school funding back to the 05-06 level, the 4-year-ago level, and if we take it back to the 4-year-ago level, then while we get stimulus money to backfill some of that, we threaten other stimulus funds that are coming down the pike. We have a Race to the Top grant, a competitive grant that school districts will qualify for, and if we cut back on our spending for education too much, we not only threaten that grant, we also push a higher probability of property tax increases at the lower level. Can I give you an exact dollar amount for your particular school district? No, but I can tell you that it will happen. It's a very real issue.
I think that also applies to the CHIP and healthcare for children. And if we don't put in our share as a state, then we leave a lot of federal dollars on the table that we can't afford to leave on the table, because we have to try to expand that and make sure that more children are insured and more adults are insured under adult basic coverage. But you did have a particular question for me. Did you have a specific question in addition to that for me?
That money goes back to property taxes in school districts, and each year when you pay your property taxes, there should be something on your bill that indicates how much comes from the tax on casino revenue. They should have, yes.
Yeah, and it varies by school district as well.
It depends on your school district.
They came down, I think the average last year was somewhere around $200. And if you go to our website, which is www.hacd.net, HACD.net, if you go to the crisis page and under the questions and answers, you'll find that very question, how is the gaming money being spent? And we have a breakdown for you as to where those dollars go. And we certified roughly the same amount this year as we did last year. So the refunds will be similar.
www.hacd, House Appropriations Committee Democrats.net.
Hi, I'm Kyla Campbell with WVRE. I have several questions, but I'm going to try to start with little and let people jump in whenever they want.
It's more appropriate, dear, if our audience asks questions before we do
that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Okay.
You can't hear us too well? How does this one sound? Can everybody hear me fine on this one? Okay, I'll just take a walk around the room. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand. I'll come over, acknowledge you, and hand you the microphone. You can ask whatever questions you'd like to ask. Excuse me.
Hi, Dana Schwank from Pennsburg, Pennsylvania. My question is, I hear all this windfall that happened, in '83 and '91, all these budget cuts and everything that we've incurred throughout the years, along with, I don't understand why we can get rid of a deaf school, which is so important to Pennsylvania. 3 is still not even adequate. Now to narrow it down to 2. First of all, we come 100 miles to this school because there is nothing where we are. We are going to be losing this program very shortly. With the budget cuts and everything else that's occurring, I don't know what's going to happen with my son. I think he needs to go to jail in order to get an education anymore in Pennsylvania. There is nothing. That's why we come to Scranton. Why is this House Bill 1318 needs to be reviewed so this becomes transparent as to exactly how we're spending our special education money. when we can increase the budget for the Pennsylvania charter schools for the deaf and the blind, but yet cut our state school out is unacceptable. I just wish that would get looked at a little bit better and consider that small group that really do need that service. What we're going to do with our child, I have no clue. And we're going to be looking at every organization around, which they're all experiencing cuts as well. So, you know, I'm begging of someone somewhere to please listen, that to lose this school is going to be devastating to a population here in Pennsylvania. After all, we've come through the Great Depression, 2 world wars, you know, horrendous flooding in '72. Somewhere that money was always found to support that school and that building and that staff. I find this unacceptable as a Pennsylvania taxpayer that this school has to be closed. Thank you.
And I have to say that your concerns have been very real, and your concerns are very real to you. They're very real to us in Harrisburg. We've heard from many of you. I think many of you took the time to come up to Harrisburg to talk to us when we had our hearing on Senate Bill 850. We heard from you again when we were here in January, and the chairman of our committee is very aware of this. Our caucus is, I think the General Assembly is, and all I can say is it's not a done deal yet. It's not over yet. I don't know what's going to happen. I can't stand here and make you a commitment, but I can tell you we're giving it very serious consideration. We're not taking it lightly. I think what I just said, we're taking it very seriously. We're looking at options. I can't tell you what the final conclusion is going to be, but we're very aware of your concerns. You guys have been heard very loudly in Harrisburg.
And just briefly, I wanted to touch on that. House Bill 1318, it's in the Education Committee. I have discussed it and advocated for the school down in Harrisburg for many months now, and it is still on the table. I was asked, Steve Corbett asked me on his show yesterday afternoon whether or not I thought it was a done deal. And I don't think anything's a done deal until we pass a budget. That's why I'm having this forum today. That's why we're discussing these concerns and the priorities of the people within this district, because these are the same concerns and the same priorities that I'll go back down to Harrisburg with and discuss with my colleagues, and I'll be a champion for the cause of the people here at this meeting and for the people within the district and within Pennsylvania. And that's why we're having this forum. And this is why these women, Jonna and Miriam, have been attending these type forums throughout the entire Commonwealth, and why the Appropriations Chairman, Dwight Evans, has been holding these forums throughout the entire Commonwealth. As I mentioned earlier, this is the second time that we're having an Appropriations Forum here in Scranton. I don't know that we've ever had an Appropriations Forum here in Scranton ever before. So I'm thankful that they're here to answer the questions that you have, but on policy matters and decisions of the governor, they can't speak to that. They can speak to the economic situation here in Pennsylvania and what they do to help us out as taxpayers through their jobs and working for the Appropriations Chairman. So I want to thank them and thank you for your question. Does anyone else have a question?
You guys are easy today.
Hi, my name is Eileen Allegrucci. In regards to the School for the Deaf, and I know many people who have attended there or had family members that did, if you're putting them into the public school system, it's going to cost a great deal more of the monies because you need to have translators, correct? Within the school systems.
I can't speak right now to a cost-benefit analysis because I don't have the numbers with me, and I didn't review them before I came. Perhaps I should have. Your point is well taken.
Okay, because I'm a teacher in the district, and I just find it that it's so beneficial to so many students to be there, okay, and to have their own group of people that they can talk with and celebrate different occasions and things with. And I find it's going to be difficult when they get into the school system that's a talking school system, for the fact that for young children, teenagers, trying to get a date, God forbid, all right, trying to, just different things, trying to find their way through the school system. I think it's going to be difficult, and it's going to cost more money than it would to keep the school open.
I understand.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? We're almost there, Kyla.
Hi, my name is Tina Seidel, and I'm the Director of Public Policy Initiatives for the Northeast Pennsylvania Center for Independent Living. I'm also the President of the Pennsylvania Providers Coalition Association. And previous to this position, I was a Director of Finance and Human Services for over a decade. So I have some more detailed financial questions. And if anyone needs clarification in the audience, I'd be happy to make it more friendly. My first question is, in May of 2009, our Commonwealth was $527 million insolvent in unemployment compensation. And in the projections that you're bringing to us today, I know that we need to have them paid back by the end of 2010, or employers will have a significant federal mandated tax increase automatically. And with your current projections, it doesn't show us coming out of the deficient.
Which projections are you looking at?
The ones on your financial statements today over the next couple of years.
Well, if the first page shows what it would look like, the bottom line, how far in the red we would be if we don't do some sort of revenue enhancements. And the second page shows where we will be if we take care of the problem with an additional revenue enhancement, like the personal income tax or the capital stock franchise tax. The unemployment compensation piece, you're right, we have a very real issue there. And we're working on legislation right now. I can't tell you where it's headed for sure. We've been briefed about it. We've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I don't have an answer for you right now.
Are any projections of paying back the unemployment compensation in your financial statements for over the next couple fiscal years, in the ones that you handed out today, us paying back?
In terms of covering what would be the automatic trigger on employers, you know, right now that automatic trigger under current law happens. So the financial statement just reflects what current law is.
Thank you for that clarification. And do you have any more information? Would it affect anyone other than employers in Pennsylvania for the automatic mandate if we aren't able to pay it back?
I don't know what you're asking. I'm sorry.
If our Commonwealth isn't able to pay back
Correct.
the federal government, other than employers receiving a tax increase, do you know of any other mandates to maybe employees, you know, that work in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that would affect?
Well, I'll tell you what I can do is I can provide that information to you. If you could provide your name and address, and we'll send, if an email would be the best, actually. We can get back to you in a little more timely fashion.
I really appreciate that. And my second question is, in the shortfall cycle history, in each of the last 3 decades that we mentioned in the 80s, 90s, and now, are there any permanent changes that are proposed to decrease expenses permanently with the temporary LIT tax increase, so that history doesn't repeat itself, that over the decades, as we may go through the cycle again, that we don't have to have temporary increases like this in the future, like we
Right.
project long term?
I don't know that the two were linked, but we've certainly made huge strides in terms of cost savings and efficiencies in our agencies through, you know, like I mentioned earlier, contract renegotiations, places where we were able to cut back on positions because of an increased use of information technology. The budget secretary the other day was talking to me about the huge number of bills that we get in just for phone bills in 1 month, paper bills, that now they're going to be able to do away with and do everything electronically, which will also create further efficiencies. I know state government gets beat up a lot for supposedly mismanagement, and you know, often, you know, stories happen, and I think oftentimes people get the impression that this is just the standard case for state government. But I have to tell you, there have been huge strides in terms of finding increased efficiencies at the agency level and savings. Something as simple as over the last four to 6 years, the administration has started requiring agencies to pool their purchases. So when an agency goes out to buy pens, for example, they no longer do it on their own. They have to pool their purchase with all of the other agencies, and the cost savings from those kinds, you know, computers, whatever it is that just standard office supplies that agencies have to purchase, the cost savings from that have been phenomenal. So while you always hear the sensational news, I think a lot of times the increased efficiencies are kind of the boring news that don't really get a lot of attention, and we have really made great strides in terms of those kinds of dollars.
Thank you. I have one comment and one consideration to ask.
Sure.
My consideration is, I know that we're trying to go green, and it's been relayed to us as providers across the state by the Department of Public Welfare. And in lieu of that, we went paperless. Unfortunately, during our monitoring visits, they want everything printed out on paper in folders, or we can't pass our monitoring visits. So I would ask that that oversight be changed, so we can change. You know, I'm looking at the bottom line.
Are you talking about DPW?
Yes.
When the DPW comes, the Pennsylvania Department, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare.
Would you do me a favor, and when you give your email address, would you jot that down and as something to, and we'll look into it and get back to you, okay?
Oh, yeah, because we would love to save that money. And,
I understand.
Being a director of finance previously, I understand the bottom line. And then my last comment, and this is personally and not on behalf of any of the organizations I represent. Personally, I work, and I would much prefer a wage tax increase, because at this point in my life, I can afford it. And I know that, like, my grandparents or my parents or those who are on subsidized income may not be able to afford the increase on property tax.
Right.
And my message is to fund people first.
Right.
You know, and that I would be willing to pay a tax increase to keep our human services for all individuals with disabilities and aging throughout the Commonwealth.
Well, thank you very much for saying that.
Thank you very much. And Justin, and I want to talk to a couple of members of my staff now, just to make sure that the idea that you expressed in order to save some money, if I could help out with that in Harrisburg, bring it to a committee meeting, I'd be happy to do that.
And Representative, we have time for probably 2 or 3 more questions, and I apologize, Ms. Fox needs to get back to a late meeting in Harrisburg.
Hello, my name is Brian Kirk. I'm from actually the Lehigh Valley, and I'm also a taxpayer. I have 2 questions, and they have nothing to do with one another. But Governor Rendell, in his first proposal for the budget, had proposed cutting the amount of school districts from, I think, from 600 to 100, if I remember correctly. Where has that gone? I'm just curious if that's...
Well, we have 500 school districts.
Right,
We did have
okay,
501, I think one consolidated. And there is a proposal that he had in the budget. I don't remember how far he asked that we reduce them. I don't remember what the proposal was, but the idea was to put together a group of people to study it and move forward from there. And then there were some trigger mechanisms involved. That's still on the table. There's a bill that's been introduced that would make that happen. We haven't come to a conclusion on it yet. It's an idea that's still out there, so it's being bantied about.
Okay, and secondly...
The important thing to remember with that, as Miriam said, that the governor's proposal in February was to create a commission to study consolidating school districts.
There's a trigger in there, though, that would make something happen depending on how the outcome.
Okay. Secondly, I know you had talked about, when you talked about the governor's proposal for the temporary personal income tax increase, you said if I misquote you, I apologize, that they had considered doing a statewide sales tax increase, but felt that because it would have been affecting everyone,
right,
that they chose. Did anybody do, just out of curiosity, what they would have had to have put the sales tax up to equal what he's what he's going to ask
Yes.
for? Okay, I'm just curious what that was.
Well, a percent of the sales tax, if you would raise the sales tax from the current 6% to 7%, so 1% increase, would raise about $1.2 billion. So 1.5 would be 1.5% it would take to get to another, it wouldn't be quite 1.5% in the sales tax, a little less than that, to do what he's proposing in terms of a 0.5% increase on the personal income tax.
Okay, thank you.
And I also wanted to share with you the consolidation of the school districts. They're discussing that within the education committee now. So as Jonna indicated, there's a commission being put together to study that. But it's in its infancy stage, I would say, at this point.
I would like to make an observation that we spend almost $1 billion on debt service. Correct? Almost $1 billion.
905 million, right.
Well,
And our
if-
debt service, we only, just so you understand, we only pay for long-term assets, just like you would issue debt for your house. We don't
I
purchase things that
understand.
are short-term assets.
I understand. My observation is, you know, if you're going to raise taxes, whatever kind of taxes it is, just get to the point and raise the taxes. Raise them enough. You just said 1% makes $1.2 billion. You could pay that off, and that's $1 billion a year you don't have to spend after that.
Thank you.
Well, Kevin,
I'll talk to you afterwards.
Leah Rudolph, Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. Kevin, do you have the capability to send out a survey to to your constituents to just say simply, would you prefer an increase in your income tax or a 1% increase in the sales tax across the state? And see what the people say.
Well, I think we have the capability to do that, but I'd also probably be hit with the criticism that I'm spending a lot of money looking for surveys to have people make decisions.
Not if you do, well,
We
not if
can't
you,
win in Harrisburg.
not if you did it online. It wouldn't cost a stamp.
That's a very good idea, and I was only saying that jokingly. But I think it's important, and that's why we're here. But I think to expand that and to put a question out like that through a website, I think is a good idea. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah. I want to thank Miriam and Jonna for being here with us today and providing us with this information.
I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. It's a pleasure talking with you, and it's nice to know that people are that interested that they can come out and have this conversation. If you have any questions, my email address is on our website, hacd.net. Be happy to hear from you.
Hold on. In just a few moments, we're going to have our scheduled speakers make their presentations, but I also want to remind everyone, because we're going to be here for a while, we're not in a hurry. This is conversational in nature, and I'm really looking forward to your input. So you can step out into the hallway, you can get yourself a water or a soda pop or a coffee, and make yourself comfortable. But as soon as the first presenter is ready, then we'll have the first presentation. No, I'm not going to hurry anyone. If someone would like to make a presentation and bump the schedule up. But I understand due to time constraints and people have set their schedules in order to make their presentations, we're not going to rush anyone out of here. We're going to stay on schedule, and anyone that would like to ask a question of us is more than welcome to. Good afternoon, Councilwoman Evans. How are you? Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Well, if everyone has gotten some refreshments, and you're more than welcome to help yourself as we go along here, but I have some presenters here that have some concerns that they'd like to address. And the first presenter that we have is Kara Sutherland from the Everhart Museum. Kara?
Thank you. I represent one of the institutions that's part of the fat of the budget, that 12-point-something% we looked at, the little green slice. And right now, Governor Rendell has scheduled us for 5%, and to be honest, I would be happy with that cut, because at this time, we all need to do our part, and we were just talking about that in the hallway. Having lived in other states and seen the impact of the arts and culture, we know we're important. But not just for the children and hanging art on the walls. We do a lot of social service initiatives. We're also an anchor for economic growth as well. So I encourage you and I appreciate your support today and taking the time to visit us in Scranton. And it means a lot. I represent an institution that opened in 1908. We're 101 years old. We are the largest museum in Northeast Pennsylvania, and we serve not only just Scranton and Lackawanna County, but 10 counties in the region. So if you could see fit to keep the non-preferred museums in the budget, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts in the budget, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, there are a lot of us who do an awful lot with just a little bit of that money. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Kara. And if I call an organization or if I call someone up that isn't prepared, or if we're moving ahead a little bit, then just let me know, and I'll just make sure that you're prepared. Diana Statsman, Director of Scola. Okay, sure. Sure. Come up here and share the podium with me, please.
Well, since I have paper, it's easier if I can lay it down somewhere. My name is Diana Statsman. I'm the Executive Director of Scola Volunteers for Literacy. And Representative Murphy recently visited our organization, and we were very happy to have you. The Senate passed a budget for 2009-2010 that called for a 29% decrease in adult education funding. Fortunately, the House Appropriations Committee voted it down, and we now find ourselves at an impasse. What can I say? I could put lots of facts and figures together, just like everybody else, but we all know what happens when you do that. Your eyes begin to glaze over, and the message is lost. So regarding the budget, I want to just talk sort of in generalities. Regarding the budget, everyone always says education is important. It's the first thing you always hear, oh, education is important. But then every year the budget comes up and you hear like high schools who threaten to cut the football team because there's not enough money for the budget. And everybody goes crazy, the football team. Then one of two things happen. After withdrawing that threat, they can cut out anything else, and that'll be okay. You can still save the football team, but so you lost some educational programs. Or, okay, you can raise the taxes, whatever you need. Just let us keep football. I'm here to talk about adult education and why its funding shouldn't be cut. This reminds me of a commercial I saw years ago, and everybody here looks a lot younger than me these days, so I don't know that you'll remember it, but it was for Fram oil filters. And it started with a mechanic, you know, working on a car engine, and he looks up, and then he starts to wipe his hands on that oily cloth, and he says, you know, a while ago, I told the owner of this car to buy a Fram oil filter for $7. Now he's going to pay me several $100s to fix his engine. And then he looked right at the camera and goes, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. You decide. Education is just like that. I would say that kindergarten through 12th grade is underfunded because their outputs are terrible. 20% of adults in Pennsylvania are functionally illiterate. So we are paying later already by having to fund adult education programs. What's more, the entire focus of state and federal government right now is jobs and economic development. I submit to you that these two terms are synonymous. You cannot have economic development without people capable of doing the jobs. And so we're paying later yet again. To date, the government has answered with impossible programs that propose to get adults to read in 6 weeks or less. These programs are all impossible and doomed to failure because you cannot teach an adult to read in 6 weeks. You can't teach them to read in 6 months. These are things that take a lot of time. Now, the next two things that I want to say are actual fact. A former Secretary of Labor once told me, it's a paraphrase, that she didn't care if no one could read or if everybody worked at McDonald's, just as long as everybody had a job. That was followed by a local WIB person who told me, now this one I remember word for word because it was short and to the point, literacy is not a job skill. After 25 years on this job, I despair of making congressmen and women understand what adult literacy really is. Your programs can put all these people in jobs and claim success, but they won't be able to keep those jobs because of low skills. Adult education programs are the pay me later bill you pay for not doing it right the first time. But if you want to get that car up and running and keep it running, you must pay the bill. I know it's tough to know what to cut when cuts must be made. Maybe if you saw the movie Dave, there's a guy who became a president and he's trying to save money for a homeless shelter for kids. And he's got all the secretaries of the departments and they're looking around to try to save money. And he looks at the Secretary of Department of Transportation and says, now, you have how many millions here on a program to make people feel better about the used car they bought? And he goes, oh, well, Mr. President, I wouldn't exactly characterize it like that. And he says, well, do you want to tell these children they have to sleep in the street so people will feel better about their car? No, obviously he didn't. You are the people who look at the budget line by line and know what each entry stands for and what it really means. Like the Senate budget part that lets senators fly around in private jets around the state. I did have a couple ideas on the way over here. I mean, if you want to tax everybody, increase the taxes on liquor. Everybody drinks in Pennsylvania. And we were talking about this around the water cooler today. The news on the paper today was tragic about an 89-year-old man who killed an 8-year-old kid from Nicholson down in Florida. And someone suggested, well, me in fact, that, you know, we test people coming into the driving system. We should post-test them coming out of the driving system. Perhaps after 65, people need to be tested. Apart from the fact that, wow, what a great revenue stream, paying for your test. Just a couple ideas. I would like to thank you for giving me a chance to speak, and I'd like to leave you with this thought. You were smart enough to get elected. I think you're smart enough to know which programs and projects should and shouldn't be dropped.
Thank you.
No hard feelings.
No. Trust me, no offense taken. A lot of the criticisms of state government and government officials, elected officials, as a whole, I understand, because, you know, what happens is people focus on, you know, the 1 or 2 or 3 people that are doing the wrong thing. But I also want to remind people there's people like that in every profession across the board, and unfortunately, we stereotype, the entire profession because of those who choose to do the wrong thing instead of doing the right thing. But I'm very happy, humbled, and proud to serve the people of this district. And as far as jet junkets and airfare and things like that, I'm really not that aware of that. I know it has happened in the past. I drive my own car back and forth to Harrisburg. It's not a very pretty looking car, but it gets the job done, and I always try to keep the taxpayers in mind because I know they're the ones that pay my salary. Thank you very much. Mary Ann Laporta. Is Mary Ann here? She's not here yet? Okay. I always say this too, and I may as well add it in at this point as I'm looking through to see who our next presenter is, that one of the biggest surprises I found after being elected to the state legislature is that there are a lot of people down there working long hours, working very hard, and they are losing sleep. They are trying their best to serve their constituents, and by and large, you could be confident that people are working hard to work through these problems, try to minimize the impact on local and statewide taxpayers, and it's not an easy task. It's not one. I always say I enlisted, I didn't get drafted, so I never complain about it. But there are a lot of people down there, much to my surprise when I got there, working a lot harder than I thought they ever would. And there's a lot of support staff that are working down there to provide the support necessary to answer questions for newly elected legislators like myself and for legislators that have been down there for a long period of time. You don't get a rule book when you get elected. You don't have all the answers. But fortunately, there's enough systemic knowledge down there that they're able to answer the questions because most of these questions have been posed before over many decades. Marion Fox, who made the presentation, the executive director for Dwight Evans, for his office, she has a lot of the answers. So we're also a conduit. We play traffic cop, and we try to direct you in the right area where you can get that help. And I want to acknowledge some people that help me do that on a day-to-day basis. I have my legislative assistant, Stephanie Hardman. She's here from Harrisburg to help us out today. Next to her is Justin McGregor, and he works with me in my district office, and he's doing a great job trying to answer questions, try to help people out. And thank you for your help, Justin. It's truly appreciated. It's a very rewarding job. I told all the people that work with me, we have the opportunity to go to work every day. We have the best job in the world, and that all we do is try to solve people's problems. And you can't solve everyone's problem every day, but you can help out enough people, and you get enough self-satisfaction out of it. Of course, you'll have to get a lot of self-satisfaction out of it because I can't afford to pay you very much. So you'll have to rely on that. But also we have with us Ryan Healy, who works in my district office, and Kristen Coaches. And Kristen Coaches is standing in the back. She helped put this forum together. She's my office manager, and I want to thank her for all she does for all of us. Mary Garm, Director, Lackawanna County Library. Mary?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Is the microphone working?
I believe
do
so.
we need the other one? It's okay? Good. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and speak this afternoon on behalf of the Lackawanna County Library System and also on behalf of other public libraries throughout Pennsylvania. I'm the administrator of the Lackawanna County Library System, and I am the immediate past president of the Pennsylvania Library Association. And I'm here today to ask for your support for level funding for libraries in the upcoming state budget. Both of the budget proposals that we've seen so far have included cuts to library line items. Everyone in this room today understands the financial pain that we are experiencing right now in our nation, in our state, in our communities, and in our homes. Government at all levels is wrestling with deficits and difficult funding choices, while on the most personal level, individuals are losing their jobs, their retirement security, and their health insurance. Lackawanna County Libraries began responding to the need to tighten our belts last summer when it became apparent that the economy was heading downhill. The public library subsidy was subjected to a budgetary reserve, and our libraries responded with spending cuts, hiring freezes, and salary freezes. Ironically, at the very same time, the demand for library service was rising, as it always does during a recession. In our libraries in Lackawanna County, we are acutely aware of the changes in life circumstances that people are undergoing because we see them come through our doors every day. People come into the library looking for help writing a resume. Maybe they haven't had to put one together for 20 years. Others come to use our public computers to file for benefits, and they rely on our staff members to teach them how to connect, how to set up an email account, and sometimes even how to use a mouse. Some come to research health information because they can no longer afford to go to the doctor. Families who have cut back on vacations, on cable, on internet access, and on going to the movies pour through the doors of our libraries to take advantage of reading materials, DVDs, and free programs for children. Libraries provide a safety net for those in our society who are most vulnerable today and those who are most frightened by what the future holds. Under the budget proposals we have seen so far, the Lackawanna County Library System stands to lose anywhere from $75,000 to about $1 million because of cuts to the public library subsidy. Library users will also see reductions in services provided on a statewide basis, including serious cuts to the operations of the state library. There is another unintended consequence to proposed cuts in spending for libraries. Pennsylvania stands to lose federal funding for libraries in an amount of about $1 million under the House bill or up to $4 million under the Senate bill. This will happen because the federal government requires states to maintain their level of financial support from year to year. Lackawanna County residents benefit directly from federal funding of libraries because it is used to provide statewide services, such as the Power Library online databases, interlibrary delivery services, and Ask Here PA, a virtual reference service. Federal funding also supports local projects through library grants, and Lackawanna County has received more than $300,000 from this source in the last 5 years. Also at risk is the library portion of the Keystone Recreation Park and Conservation Fund. Grants from this fund have been used to support the building of new facilities like the Valley Community Library in Peckville and the maintenance of historic facilities like the Lackawanna County Children's Library. We count on future funding from this source for prospective library projects in the North Pocono area and in the city of Scranton. Because of the great need for library services in this difficult economy, I ask that you level fund libraries at the fiscal year 2008-2009 amount. And please note that funding for libraries appears in a number of various line items. A cut in the public library subsidy affects the funds that Lackawanna County libraries receive for everyday operations, while cuts in other line items affect statewide services that students and library users have come to rely on. I'd like to thank you for your support of libraries in Lackawanna County and for your consideration of our request for level funding in what we know will be a very difficult budget year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And she brought out a couple of critical points, and I want to reiterate them, and that this is not only applicable to libraries, but it's applicable to a lot of different programs that we administer here in the state of Pennsylvania. There's a lot of federal, state dollars leveraged against federal dollars in many departments and many bureaus and for many worthwhile organizations. And that's why you'll see at times funding and state funding, and people will wonder, why is the focus being put on that? But there might be a federal match 5, 10 times more than what the state has to invest into that program. So a lot of the programs, and Senate Bill 850, proposed by the Republican Senate, and that was supported right along party lines. That drastically cut many programs right across the board. It left hundreds of millions of dollars on the table as far as federal matching funds. And that's why, as an elected official and as a caucus as a whole, the Democratic caucus can't support Senate Bill 850. But we have to work to make sure that we do support programs, especially those where we're receiving a federal match. And there's many instances where that's the case, in addition, as Mary pointed out, to the library system. Brenda Colbert and Kevin Grebus. Kevin?
Thank you very much, Representative Murphy. Can I ask to address the group from the podium as well today?
That would be fine. You're more than welcome to come up here. And I also want to point out that he's an attorney and he represents the elderly and the medical death tax. There's currently House Bill 1351 that he may want to speak with or speak on briefly. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. Again, I want to really thank you very much, Representative Murphy, for this great opportunity to speak to a group of people about a proposed addition to the budget that probably very few people are aware of. This is something that would actually create a hardship for many frail, elderly residents of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And this has directly to do with the issue of Medicaid and Medicaid reimbursements. Earlier today, you heard this talk of how much of the budget is made up of Medicaid expenditures, and quite a bit of that is used to pay for individuals in long-term care facilities and nursing homes. Right now, nursing homes cost about $7,000 a month. So most of our elderly who are in nursing homes have to rely on the Medicaid program to pay for their care. Federal law requires Pennsylvania to seek reimbursement from the estates of deceased Medicaid recipients to recover some of the money that was spent on them during their lifetime. And since this law was instituted back in 1994, this estate recovery law, estate recovery has only applied to assets that are owned solely by the Medicaid recipient at the time of their death. And for someone to qualify for Medicaid, their assets have to be pretty low. They have to have generally less than $8,000, but they may continue to own a home. So many Medicaid recipients who are in skilled nursing facilities continue to own their residence. Under current law, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, upon the death of that Medicaid recipient, will seek to recover from the estate, from that residence, the amount of money spent on that person's care during his or her lifetime. Right now, they can only do that if the house is owned solely by the Medicaid recipient. There is a provision in House Bill 1351, it's actually Section 1412 of House Bill 1351, that seeks to expand Medicaid estate recovery to a whole host of other assets, including jointly titled property, property that's owned jointly with a spouse, owned jointly with a child, life insurance, annuities, all sorts of products. It's a very broad addition to the law, giving the Department of Public Welfare pretty much carte blanche in terms of what they can recover against. Under current law, if you have, as an example, if you have a married couple and one of those spouses needs nursing facility care and that spouse qualifies for Medicaid, the house is protected for the healthy spouse. And under current law, when the spouse in the nursing home passes away, the house is continued to be protected for the spouse in the community. There's no state lien placed against the residents. If Section 1412 of House Bill 1351 is enacted, that would all change. The Commonwealth would be able to place a lien against the property of the surviving spouse, even though that person herself or himself never received Medicaid benefits during his or her lifetime. So this would really work a hardship, thrust a hardship upon many elderly individuals who are Medicaid recipients. The surviving spouse, the community spouse, will be unable to sell the property or take a reverse mortgage or tap into the equity of that property in any form whatsoever. This law would also change the fundamentals of property law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Right now, if an individual owns real estate jointly with someone else with the right of survivorship, upon the death of the first joint owner, his or her interest passes automatically by operation of law to the surviving joint owner. So as an example, you have a mother and a daughter. Mother goes into the nursing home. Her house is joint with her daughter. She added her daughter's name to it years ago as a joint tenant with the right of survivorship. The daughter lives there in the home. Mother goes into the nursing home and qualifies for Medicaid benefits. Under current law, upon the mother's death, there would be no Medicaid estate recovery because the home is titled jointly with the right of survivorship. So the property would pass automatically to the surviving owner, avoiding estate recovery. This expansion of estate recovery would work to include now jointly titled property. So in a situation like this, the state of Pennsylvania, the Department of Public Welfare would actually have the ability to place a lien against that jointly titled property. Also, life insurance is another area that would be subject potentially to Department of Public Welfare liens as well. So again, I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to this potential change in the law. We've spoken to Representative Murphy. He is now aware of it, and I really wanted to thank him for giving me this opportunity to discuss this with you. There are some handouts, I think, that are being passed around, the detail, the specifics of this legislation, and you can get obviously a lot more information from that. So again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to discuss this today. Sure.
That is an earth-shattering piece of legislation, especially considering the age of Pennsylvania in general. How can something so monumental be, what's the word I'm looking for, being put forward to vote? And nobody's heard about this. And the next, you just would turn around and, oh, I don't own my, it's highway robbery. My house, everything?
You're absolutely right. There is a general lack of knowledge with respect to these provisions in the bill. As a side note, the proposals, if this is enacted, it's going to save potentially $1.2 million in the first fiscal year. When we're talking about billions, that's not a huge piece of the pie. Furthermore, in this legislation, there is absolutely no, I guess, assessment of how much it's going to cost to implement this. Provisions like this have failed in other states. They've been repealed. People are outraged by them when they find out that they could lose their home or a lien could be placed on their property. So again, I thank Representative Murphy for this opportunity to discuss this issue. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Kevin. I just wanted to address a point that was brought up, that sometimes you'll have a critical piece of legislation, something that's substantive and that important, that affects senior citizens here within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I appreciate Kevin and his law partner Brenda coming to my office to bring the attention to bring this this bill to my attention. But what will happen a lot of times, a bill like this, a request for co-sponsorships will go out, the bill will go into committee. It may be being voted on in committee or discussed in committee. They may want to have a physical note attached to it so you'll know all the monetary ramifications and how this bill what kind of economic impact this bill would have. So it's usually not until a bill is brought out of committee that you really that it really comes to light and people start discussing it, and there's still 2 more times that it has to be voted on in the House before it goes to the Senate, or so it's still a long process. This is something that I'm very happy that Kevin brought to my attention, and I'm sure as a committee member for the area agencies on aging, this will be of critical interest to the people that I represent on that committee. So it will be further discussed. But thank you very much, Kevin. Dr. Sharon McCrone. There you go.
Representative Murphy, thank you so much for having us all. However, it is a bit frustrating, and maybe I can take a moment to express my frustration that the people who are responsible for some of the, perhaps all of the predicaments that we are in are not here. And so we are all talking to ourselves in some ways, because when we think about the multi-million-dollar people, the golden parachute people, all of the people who really are at the heart of what caused all of this, are completely disconnected from the effects of it. And I think that's probably one of the things that frustrates me more than anything, is we all understand this. To a person in this room, we all understand this. We may be working with or serving a different human service or a different population. However, what I can almost guarantee you is that many of the families we serve are families that touch all of our services, all of our lives. And before I continue, I should probably tell you where I'm from. I am the executive director of EOTC, and we are a private nonprofit. We are based in Scranton. We serve families throughout Lackawanna County and some surrounding counties, and we provide services really across the boards, anything that has to do with economic self-sufficiency or with family stability. And probably, if we had to sum up the impact of all of the budget cuts, they are impacting economic self-sufficiency and family stability, and that relates to all of us. My other very general comments, because as all of you know, all of our participants and all of the people we serve are affected negatively by this. However, I think what some of the, again, some of the folks who are not here don't realize is that they are exponentially affected, because someone who comes to EOTC might also be going to Scola, might also be relying on the library, might also, it's across our families, the families that I serve, that Diana serves, that come to the library, that Don Broderick serves. We are all serving a family unit with many, many needs, and they are multiply, exponentially affected by this. And there is no clear way to get that message to the people who really are at the heart of the difficulty. And that probably is, in terms of a frustrating point that I have. The other thing that I will say is that I have thought for a really long time that nonprofit administrators should be role models for private industry. Because if private industry was subject to the amount of regulation, the amount of requirements, the audit requirements, the budget constrictions that we have, I would guess, would not be in this much of a pickle. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen. But I think those are just things for us to, as citizens, as taxpayers, as consumers, we are trying at EOTC to help our participants understand this as well, that there is a voice and a vote. And I think that's part of the obligation that we all have as well. And the other part of it that is real to us at EOTC is we started a job support group, which we had, it sort of went the way of its own way for a couple of years. And midway through all of this, we reinstituted it. And when we did, there were 6 people who attended it. We are now up to more than 36 a week. And these are the same people that they are, again, being affected in all ways. But here's another piece that I don't think people are getting, which is that those folks who are losing their jobs are able to, and because their economic situations require it, they are taking lower paying jobs. And as they take those lower paying jobs, they are forcing out the people who used to take those lower paying jobs. So there is a negative ripple effect to all of this that is going to hit long, long, long the long term. And so I just think those are some of the things that, that we have to look at. We have to look at the fact that we are willing to build more prisons, but we are not willing to do prevention. We are not willing to spend money on our children and in education and in child care that will prevent some of those situations from happening. So it's just, it is so frustrating to me, and I imagine to all of you, that the people who need to be here, with the exception of you, the people who need to be here to really see the impact of this and hear the impact of this are disconnected and isolated from it. And that makes me crazy. So with that, I will just say that we at EOTC, the families we serve, are the families that many of you serve. They are going to be hit every different direction. Our programs have been level funded for more than 5 years. And so we have not had an increase. Our staff has not had an increase, nor have we had an increase in our funding for over 5 years for most of our programs. So think about that. And it's almost like we as a nation are beginning to feel what the people we serve have been feeling for many, many years. And that is, there's just got to be some way to get that across to people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And once again, there's a lot of good points that are brought out in that testimony. And that we have people, more now than ever before, due to the difficult economic times that we face, due to rising unemployment, we have people relying on social services, human services programs, relying on libraries and the training centers, more now than ever. So we have a difficult responsibility. We have to make sure that these are programs that are either level funded or they're projected to lose funding for the upcoming calendar or fiscal calendar year. And that's the difficulty, because there's an increased burden on these services. Some people that never supported or was never advocated for those types of services before are now applying for those services. So these are difficult times, and when you have a situation where you have more people than ever relying on those services, we have to do something, and I believe that's one of my primary focuses. You know, we'll talk about a lot of things over the course of the next hour and 50 minutes, and you haven't heard me speak about it, particulars with the budget to this point. Other than my commitment is in line with the committees that I represent. Two of the most important committees, I'm on 4 committees. I'm on the Labor Committee, I'm on the Area Agency on Aging Committee, I'm on the Children and Youth Committee, and I'm also on Game and Fisheries Committee. But on those committees, we deal, especially through aging and through children and youth and labor, with trying to get people to work. We're trying to make sure that we provide services to children and senior citizens that need it. And my advocacy so far in the state legislature has been focused just on that, on passing bills that address financial exploitation of senior citizens and making sure the small percentage of people that hold power of attorney over seniors do so responsibly and don't take advantage of vulnerable senior citizens. I have been advocating for the Scranton State School for the Deaf, as many people in this room are aware, since early February. And my commitment to Pennsylvanians and to the residents of my district is that those are my priorities. My priorities are on social programs, they're on human service programs, they're on children. And when we have to look at prioritizing our spending down in Harrisburg, you have to make sure you realize that there's, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Sometimes it's more than equal and opposite. Sometimes it's very extreme. So we have to consider, when we're funding different programs, what happens if we don't? What's the alternative? In the end, are we going to spend more money? Is it going to cost all of Pennsylvanians more? And it probably will, Because if we can't keep people in their homes, people that are in the aged population, and we have people living longer now than ever, which is a good thing, but it also increases the burden on our healthcare system. So we have to make sure that if we're going to cut funding to keep people in their homes, well, we have to realize we're also going to have to pay more in the end, because we're going to have more people in nursing homes, and the cost of healthcare is going to be driven up. So there are just a couple of things that I wanted to point out, and I want all of you to be aware that these issues are important to me, and I not only think about, what our funding and what decisions we make today and how they're going to impact us today, but I think about these decisions and how they're going to impact us years from now. So I wanted to share that with you before I introduce our next presenter. Tom Thomas, President of Act 101, Pennsylvania Association for Educational Opportunity. Tom? Absolutely. Welcome.
This microphone just looked a better height than that one. I was a little intimidated. So, thank you, Representative Murphy, for having all of us here today, and anyone who has taken a view at all, as I have, of the state budget, just to look through the pages, you immediately gain awareness of how complex the entire budget is, and I cannot imagine trying to grasp all that needs to be understood about the myriad of programs. So we especially appreciate, all of us who took the time to be here today, that you are being very thoughtful about learning, putting aside some time to learn about some of the details to make these decisions, and we're certainly, I know I am certainly convinced that you'll take this information and use it to make the best decision for all of us. I represent our Act 101 educational opportunity programs from our local colleges and universities, and I'll just take this brief time that I've been given just to share with Representative Murphy the essence of the program, the things I think that he needs to know and understand about Act 101. But I'll personalize it a little bit, as some have done before me, because I like to mention students, because that tells us we're not talking about statistics, we're talking about real people, like David. David was a student who came from a very low-income family, first in his family to go on to college. He did not make the admissions cut due to normal requirements. However, because we have an Act 101 program, David was able to come to Wilkes University, and we were able to provide him with support. You would know David if you came to the commencement at Wilkes University, because he was selected as the student to give the commencement address. It doesn't happen all the time to students who come under these circumstances to the university, but I thought it was rather fortuitous that I would get to be here today with Representative Murphy, and at the same time know that one of our students actually became the #1 student who was chosen. Now, but that's not the whole story. Part of the story, and I'll save the end for later, but part of the story is the student who he had to beat out in order to do that, Jamie, was also a conditionally admitted student to Wilkes University who came in through our Act 101 program. And that doesn't happen. I don't want to create the impression that this happens through Act 101 programs at all the schools all the time, and I also don't want to take full credit for it. But I do know that students need an opportunity if they don't meet regular admissions guidelines. What David and Jamie both did not realize is that when the Higher Education Equal Opportunity Act of 1971 was first passed by the legislature, the driving force at that time was mostly ethical considerations, and also the idea that we need to help families break through the cycle of poverty. But certainly it was an ethical and moral response. That was driving the decision at the time. However, today, although those still give us inspiration at the colleges to help these students, it isn't the driving force. There's a third factor that's now involved, and that new dimension is the economic needs of the Commonwealth for highly qualified workers. Today, educational and economic opportunity are entwined to such a degree that it's virtually impossible to distinguish between them. Numerous national reports, actually too many really, have made it clear that we will not have reliable economic growth in the future without extending educational opportunity to more students coming from low-income families. Even the Advisory Committee on Student Financial Assistance, in their report, pointed out in the year 2006 that this inequality, this gap in college completion rates will continue and to undermine our ability to compete in this new century. To some extent, however, all of these reports are only confirming something I think we almost all know and all recognize, even if we don't have the statistics. After all, since the early 1970s, income and living standards have become increasingly allocated, some would say brutally allocated, according to educational attainment. In other words, a state's economic prosperity is determined mostly by the size of its workforce that holds a college degree. Even the Pennsylvania Chamber Foundation stated in its 2007 report that educational attainment of our population has consistently appeared in studies as a key factor in our regional and state economic growth, usually measured as a share of post-college age population with at least a bachelor's degree. But despite all of this since 1970, the chance of a child from a low-income family achieving a bachelor's degree remains, by the age of 24, remains at 6%. It was at 6% in 1970, and despite all of the financial aid increases, despite all of our efforts, it remains 30 more years later, still at 6%. In fact, Tom Mortensen of the Pell Institute in Washington has demonstrated that the disparity between those in the lowest quartile and those in the upper quartile has actually doubled since 1970 who have college degrees. So when a student from a low-income family does manage, and they do by the thousands, when they do manage, some of you are here, when they do manage to make it through the educational pipeline and somehow make it to the front doors of a college or a university, that's only the beginning of the game. We in the Act 101 program recognize these students as a very, very important resource to the Commonwealth. They are a rare resource. Only 6% of them will eventually make it to graduation. But as first-generation college students report all of the time in overwhelming numbers, getting into college, despite the obstacles, is relatively easy, of course. Staying there and completing the degree is much, much more difficult. And this is where Act 101's educational opportunity programs come into place. The Act 101 professionals use best practices from all around the country using what we can find from studies such as the report Moving Beyond Access, College Success for Low-Income Students. We use their best practices within our programs all throughout the Commonwealth, such as easing the transition to college by mediating students' experience, focusing on their first year in college, monitoring student progress, providing intensive academic advising, individualized academic support, increasing student engagement, but also creating a culture of success. But I'm sure Representative Murphy and others are going to be asking, is this the best use of our financial resources as we have to balance these priorities? Another conclusion from the earlier report, Mortgaging Our Future, states that providing college-level remediation to students who are marginally unqualified can dramatically increase a bachelor's degree attainment. They find also that using federal, state, and institutional resources is the ideal way to help underqualified students achieve bachelor's degrees. A U.S. Department of Education study of student support programs also found that these programs have a positive and statistically significant effect on 3 student outcomes. These programs impact grades, credit earned, and retention. And I'm not sure we can ask for a whole lot more, certainly, than that. But perhaps the most overlooked advantage, and I think Representative Murphy was heading in this direction when he talked about the future, balancing current priorities and looking at the crisis, but balancing that with the needs of the economy still in the future and not taking our eyes off of that. I think one of the most overlooked results of these programs for low-income students is that they work to protect our return on our investment in student financial aid. We ensure that more students complete their degrees and are therefore able to repay their loans, but also to get jobs to add to the tax base in the Commonwealth. Still, we continue to invest in financial aid programs without working in the most deliberate way to increase college completion rates. The number of Act 101 programs has decreased since 2007 from 74 to 64 already, irrespective of the budget. This was before budget cuts. That 10-program drop in the Commonwealth was due to guideline changes. So already we are operating with 10 fewer programs in the Commonwealth and serving approximately 3,000 to 4,000 fewer students. Already, since the proposed budget for the program was decreased from $9.3 million at the start of the current fiscal year to what was originally proposed, of course that can change, to $8.6 million for the next budget year. So the programs have already experienced decreases. Now, we recognize, as we all do, anyone needs to keep up with the news understands a great deal that this is a very complicated crisis and certainly a very difficult and challenging one for our elected representatives. And we know there's a need there to balance the priorities. However, we believe that helping low-income students achieve their college degrees is one of those priorities. It's a time to actually renew. It's an opportunity to renew our investment and say that educational opportunity is still important, that regardless of your income, you should still have the same opportunity to complete a college degree if you have the will to do it and the ability. And this is also certainly not the time to retreat from our commitment, our moral commitment that we have made to make educational opportunity a reality for thousands of low-income students who will somehow, once again, make it through the system and make it to the front doors of the colleges and universities in northeastern Pennsylvania. Thank you, Representative, for your time and your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And I'm sure Mr. Thomas will agree that once we prepare these children, once they attain their bachelor degrees, we are now better suitable to draw businesses into Pennsylvania for economic growth and to improve our tax base because we have a qualified professional workforce. And that's the cycle. That's what we have to make. That's why we have to make sure we maintain our focus on education, because if we're going to be globally competitive, if we're going to be competitive with other states within the United States, Pennsylvania has to make sure that they're committed to quality education and higher education. I think it's critical. Thank you for your comments. Susan Jeffrey. Welcome, Susan. Susan is the director for the North Pocono Library. Would you like to come up here, or? Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So much. Good afternoon, and thank you, Representative Murphy, for providing us this opportunity. And I didn't come to be redundant, as I knew Mary Garm would be here representing the Lackawanna County Library System. I came as one of the members of the Lackawanna County Library System to share with you some of the personal stories and the importance of providing funding and preserving funding for public libraries. We've heard many of these stories today. I share your frustrations because, and we've heard it repeatedly, and in libraries, we do the same thing you do, Representative Murphy. We help people solve problems, and we do that every day. And I can't tell you how the tide has turned, how in the last 6 months, the number of times our door has opened has increased repeatedly. There's jams at the door with people taking out more and more materials, and people coming in with more and more problems and needing more and more assistance, and it's because of the economy. Public libraries are the best bargain in the state budget because we cover so many types of human services needs and educational needs. And these services that we provide are not easily duplicated anywhere else in the community. We provide free internet access and Wi-Fi access, and this need is growing. I cannot tell you, our computers are full every single day. People are not maintaining their subscriptions to the internet, and they are not fixing their printers. So they come in to print out resumes. They come in to apply for applications for jobs. The library provides those early literacy programs, and we just started on Monday our summer reading program, and I think this is a record. To date, we have over 90 children signed up for summer reading program, and the first week has not even ended. We provide assistance and resources for students through the statewide resources like Power Library. And this is really important if they don't have computers at home, because if we're not open and we don't have those resources available, then they can't succeed and even reach the Act 101 program. So it's all a chain. And we're a major resource for homeschoolers, and particularly in the North Pocono area, we have a lot of homeschooling families that rely on the public library. We're providing opportunities for people to get better jobs by providing a place for people to have exams proctored. And this, again, has become more and more of an opportunity that and a need that we fill. The North Pocono Library doesn't have a family place, but I know that there are libraries in Lackawanna County that provide the Family Place program that provide opportunities for people to learn parenting skills for their children. You could just see the human services and the educational services that the public libraries offer just go on and on. You know that the funding is critical, and you know that it's in jeopardy. A few stories that I wanted to share with you was that there was a young woman recently, and I could tell because I happened to look at the cover page, her literacy skills were not good. She came in and she was faxing for requests for her transcripts so that she could go back to school to further her career. This is a woman who needed more help than we could possibly provide. But at least she knew that by coming to the public library, there was a public fax machine, and she could at least make those steps to initiate an opportunity for herself. We recently had a very frustrated, later middle-aged woman who came into the library to submit an application to either the Gap or Old Navy, and she needed to apply online. She was completely computer illiterate, and she needed our assistance in order to get through the application. Even with our best of help, she tired, and out of frustration, she just said this just wasn't worth it. But we stayed with her, and she appreciated our help. We also had an older gentleman out of work who came in, who was working through one of the human service organizations, but needed to access his account to try and look for more job opportunities online through one of the career link websites. I contrast with that some stories of the young people who are streaming in for the summer reading program. Repeatedly, more and more families, and the diversity of these families is growing. Students from the age of 5 up to teenagers who are coming in to use our resources to borrow books, and they come in and they also borrow videos. And some of these students are challenged. They're challenged, and they need the repeated learning opportunity all summer long in order to maintain their grades in the educational system, or they will fall far behind. And as Mary Garn pointed out, the families are looking for free entertainment for their children for the summer. Once again, it's in numbers and masses that I have not seen ever before. They are coming out and taking out stacks of DVDs, stacks of CDs, stacks of books, and they are seeking out items that didn't circulate before, like our free museum pass, because they just need to find ways to entertain their family and to do things that are constructive, and to do that for free. And there's one particular story that I want to share with you of a young man who came in another service that we provide at the public library is an opportunity and a safe place for young people to do community service. And we have the honor students, but this is also community service for those kids who have fallen down a different pathway. And we think that we can offer them something. We offer them mentorship, we offer them guidance, and we offer them a safe place to learn something productive. And there was a young man, his name was Justin, and he came in the early spring, and he had broken into a house that was under construction, and Mom had called us because she said even the probation officer, the caseload is too high, and she was told that she needed to find a place where he could do his community service, but that he needed to start doing it and start doing it soon. So she called on his behalf. He came in every day. He had a low self-esteem. He had the long hair and his head was down. And we took him under our wing. And, well, we realized very quickly he couldn't reshelve books because he did not have those literacy skills. He was good enough to put the CDs back in the cases when they came back. And we started mentoring him. And as he cleaned up areas in the parking lot, we complimented him for a job well done. Well, about 2 or 3 weeks into it, he was standing taller. Then he brought in his homework. And we would check and see, did he have his homework done? Well, no, but I'll bring it in tomorrow. And then when he proudly got an 82 on his health project right before the end of school, he made sure that he told us. And he left, finishing his 30 hours of community service, a much healthier young man, a man who was much more prepared to go back to school and be a productive young man. And he knew that he had some self-worth. So I think the value of our public library is evident in many ways. I come to ask you to fight, and I know I'm speaking to the choir, but I felt that it was necessary for one more public library to show our face, to let you know how important it is to us that you preserve level funding for public libraries, and as well to preserve the Keystone Parks and Recreation grant program that is in jeopardy. This is particularly important for the North Pocono Public Library because our library is in a critical need for a new building. We are in a 1,300 square foot space, and as I mentioned it earlier, there's always a jam at the front door because people can't come in when people are going out because there just is no more room for programming, for books, for services. And we need to be able to meet the needs for new and up-to-date materials for our population, for new technology, and for space for tutoring and programs, another area of services that has continued to grow. We have one table in the library where we can offer a space for tutors. A woman called the other day, asked if she could reserve the table, and I said, well, there is one table. I said, you can come in and you can stake out the space, or if you'd like, you can share it, or you can go into the children's room and use the toddler-sized chairs. But people are using any space that we have available. They need to meet in an open public place to do their tutoring. There's a greater need for that service, and we are trying to meet the needs as best we can. So I thank you very much for your time. I know I'm speaking to those who understand the need the greatest, but I felt it was very important for one of the smaller member libraries to come and share our stories with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Susan. And I don't see that as being redundant, but I think the stories that you've shared with us here today just emphasize the importance of the library system and the benefits derived by Pennsylvanians that are utilizing these services. So I think that's very important, and I appreciate you sharing those stories with us today. Don Broderick, Director of the ARC.
Kevin, I was going to use this microphone. I was feeling bad for it because nobody was over here, but
okay,
if I can come forward, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kevin, for allowing us to speak on the state budget today. As was mentioned, my name is Don Broderick, and I'm the Executive Director of the ARC of Northeastern Pennsylvania. We serve and advocate for hundreds of consumers and family members in 6 counties in the great Northeast. Like most others, I'm concerned about the current budget crisis and pending budget cuts that will adversely affect people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. The community MHMR budget, mental health and mental retardation budget, is largely dependent on the federal Medicaid program for its funding, in many cases up to 85%. State funding cuts very well may affect the state match so that this system could suffer a double loss. Kevin mentioned this before, that there's a number of programs in Pennsylvania like this. We have taken people out of institutions in Pennsylvania, as all across the country, and placed them in community, not only because of a better quality of life, but because in many cases it was cheaper. And now we're contemplating budget cuts. Budget cuts to programs in community where often we are paying our staff among the lowest wages of any human service element in the state. We're talking about a system that is already very fragile and often is kept together with duct tape and glue. I'm talking about some of the most vulnerable citizens in Pennsylvania. I know that Kevin, who recently visited us at the ARC, knows exactly what I'm talking about. and I appreciate that. He's taken his time to be able to get out to community and experience a lot of what goes on here, and in your short time, I want to compliment you for that. For the tens of thousands of Pennsylvania residents with intellectual and developmental disabilities currently served in community-based programs, and the 20,000 people still on waiting lists for services. Please do not balance the state budget on the backs of people with disabilities. There was a lady in the back a little bit earlier who mentioned one comment that I think should be the mantra this year: people first. With that, I'm going to end. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Don. This name is a little bit difficult for me to read. Is Chester Kolesa? Chester, if you'd like to speak, come up, please. Certainly. Yep. You're more than welcome. Thanks for coming.
Oh, you're welcome. Good afternoon. And thank you, Representative Murphy, for the invitation to the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission to attend this budget town hall meeting. This presentation is also on the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission PHMC website, www.phmcstate.pa.us, and it's entitled Impact of SB 850 on the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission 2009-2010 budget. The budget adopted by the Senate in SB 850 would have a devastating effect on the programs of the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, as well as place in jeopardy the historical assets held in trust for the people of Pennsylvania. The additional reduction of $4,457,000 added to the reductions proposed in the governor's budget represents a 25% cut in PHMC funding. This translates into a loss of 118 positions, or 38% of the PHMC staff. SB 850 also eliminates $6.8 million from Keystone funds, further devastating the Commission's ability to provide for essential repairs, fire and security protection, and essential needs for more than 450 buildings and their associated infrastructure managed by the PHMC. These buildings contain several million museum artifacts, archival collections that together with landmark historical structures are the historic treasures of the Commonwealth. These tangible remains of the cultural history of the people of Pennsylvania are irreplaceable and would be subject to fire, theft, vandalism, mold, water damage, and deterioration from lack of maintenance. The following is a summary of the impact that these reductions would have on the PHMC and its programs. The State Museum of Pennsylvania, reduction of hours of the operation of the State Museum of Pennsylvania to 3 days per week, meaning 70,000 fewer people served, with at least half being school students. Limited facility use by community groups, state agencies, and others. Historic sites and museums. 6 sites already plan to discontinue state-supported and staffed public programs in response to the governor's budget. Further reduction in personnel necessitated by SB 850 would result in the closure of the remaining 17 sites and museums to all public programming and leave only sufficient staff to provide administrative support, basic maintenance, and security. Among these 17 are the Anthracite Heritage Museum and the Scranton Iron Furnaces, of which I am the site administrator. Site closures would result in lost revenue for the PHMC and its nonprofit community support groups totaling $1.8 million from admissions, facility rentals, museum stores, and special events. Archives and History Program. The continued operation of the state archives will be reduced with public hours. Suspend publication of Pennsylvania Heritage Magazine, co-published with the Pennsylvania Heritage Society. And I do have a copy of that magazine that I can give you today that you can take with you. And discontinue operation of the State Record Center. Grants. Yes. A revenue loss, I estimated $1.8 million statewide. Oh, thank you. In terms of grants, loss of grant assistance to over 320 organizations that provide public programs for over 8 million visitors and employ over 3,000 full and part-time positions. Elimination of the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission's Keystone Grant Program means a loss of 20 to 30 historic rehabilitation projects annually for buildings owned by nonprofits and local governments. The value of matching non-governmental funds generated by this program is approximately $15 million. So that's what you were talking about, some of those matches. Also, many of you may be familiar with Pennsylvania's Historical Marker Program. I know there's one at the Scranton School for the Deaf. The suspension of the entire marker program and the cancellation of maintenance and replacement contract for 2,000 existing historical markers due to loss of Keystone funding. And those historical markers have been placed in Pennsylvania since 1914. Preservation of historic buildings, museum, and collections. Keystone funds eliminated for all critical fire and security systems. These 30 systems at properties throughout the state are required to meet building codes for occupancy. Failure to maintain these systems poses a threat to life safety, historic structures, archives, and artifacts. Keystone funds eliminated for all site infrastructure and repairs. On-site sewage treatment plants and water treatment systems require maintenance, service, as-needed repairs that are mandated by the state and federal environmental health regulations. Unfunded building maintenance, such as roof replacements, gutters, downspouts, could result in catastrophic failures and lead to water damage, mold, and damage to artifacts. I'd like to thank you for your interest in the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, and I'll get that magazine for you so you have it here. Thank you very much for your time today.
You're very welcome, Chester, and thank you for the presentation. Thank you. I think that exhausts the current list that I've had for presenters. Let me skip back through. There was, okay. Mike Costello? Pardon me, Mike. Sorry to overlook you. Please come up. Okay. Yep, I'll make sure he gets it.
Thank you. My name is Mike Costello, and I'm Vice President of Moses Taylor Healthcare System in Scranton. Earlier this week, I had the pleasure of meeting with Representative Murphy and also with Representative Ken Smith in their Harrisburg offices, and they had invited me to make a presentation at this afternoon's program. I, too, want to talk about the Medicaid program, which Don Broderick had also mentioned previously. And I want to begin by reiterating something that Mary Ann Fox had said during her presentation. And that is that Medicaid is not a program for poor people. While that may be a public perception, it in fact provides health care services for Pennsylvania's most vulnerable populations, the elderly, persons with disabilities, pregnant women, and children. In the Medicaid system, money is not provided to the patient. It is either paid directly to the hospital, the nursing home, or the doctor to reimburse them for the health care services they provide, or to managed care organizations for the care that so that they can pay providers for eligible services. Pennsylvania's Medicaid program is known as medical assistance, and it provides health care services to about 1 out of 7 Pennsylvanians. That's about 1.9 million people in the Commonwealth in one way or another receive health care services from Medicaid. It represents about 20% of the hospital days in all Pennsylvania hospitals. That's on average, and it ranges in some areas up to as high as 75% of all hospital patient days. It funds 1 out of every 3 births in Pennsylvania, and it is the most important source of financing for the cost of premature infants that are born and that require neonatal intensive care services. It also fills the gap in Medicare coverage, including outpatient prescription drugs and cost sharing for 318,000 low-income elderly and disabled people who are enrolled in both Medicare and Medicaid. We do not have Medicaid doctors, Medicaid nurses, and other Medicaid hospital staff. When Medicaid payment dollars are eliminated from the healthcare system, hospitals' ability to employ personnel and provide healthcare services is impacted. Hospitals must continue to provide the care for Medicaid patients and for all patients needing care. And when Medicaid hospital patient payments are cut and hospital finances have to be redirected, decisions also have to be made about the viability of many other healthcare services that benefit each community. Medicaid is the largest form of federal dollars to states. In Pennsylvania, prior to the passage of the American Relief and Recovery Act last winter, the federal government paid 54 cents of every dollar of Medicaid costs. For the 27-month period of the Federal Stimulus Act, Pennsylvania will receive approximately $1.2 billion in 2009, a little over $1.9 billion in 2010, and $963 million in state fiscal year 2011, based upon current funding levels. As a result, any cuts to state Medicaid payments significantly impair the federal share to Pennsylvania, and thus has a compounding effect on Pennsylvania communities and economies. For every $1 million that Pennsylvania decreases its Medicaid spending, an additional $1.7 million in federal funding is lost. The Commonwealth would lose $4 million in business activity, and 65 Pennsylvania jobs would be impacted. Now, that's for every $1 million. Thus, the $280 million cut in medical assistance payments to hospitals, $104 million of which is state money, would lead to a nearly $700 million in lost business in Pennsylvania and over 6,700 lost jobs. Clearly, reductions in state spending for Medicaid results in lost opportunity for federal dollars. Cutting Medicaid during an economic downturn worsens the state's economy. The federal stimulus package represents a significant federal investment in the healthcare system, and it acknowledges that healthcare delivery in hospitals are vital to the nation and to each state's economic recovery. We need to assure that these federal Medicaid funds are dedicated to healthcare and are used as they were intended. All regions of Pennsylvania benefit from Medicaid funding. Pennsylvania's rural counties have as high a percentage of Medicaid enrollment as do urban counties. Medicaid is a critical source of coverage for all communities, as well as a critical source of income for healthcare providers who contribute to the economic development of communities. If obstetrical units in rural parts of the state were to close, pregnant women would be at risk as they must travel further for care. Why would young families want to move into an area like that or remain in the area without this vital health care service? Why would a business want to relocate to a community if the hospital services have been eliminated or scaled back? Why would a young physician want to relocate to a rural community if the hospital is financially fragile? And we do have a problem with primary care physician manpower in Pennsylvania. We're drastically short of the numbers of doctors that we need, particularly in rural and outlying communities. There are some financial points I would like to make about the hospital community's overall fiscal health. Medicaid hospital payments relative to costs in Pennsylvania have been substantially below the national average and that of comparison states. Pennsylvania hospitals right now are underpaid for Medicaid services.
They receive about 85 cents of revenue for every $1 of cost that they incur for inpatient care, and 54 cents of revenue for every dollar that they incur in outpatient costs. As you know, when Medicaid enrollment arises when the economy is weak due to rising unemployment and declining incomes. In the midst of the economic downturn, Pennsylvania Medicaid enrollment, and thus funding, continued to grow in 2008 and continues to grow in 2009. There are 145 general and specialty hospitals that receive Medicaid supplemental payments under the state's program. The supplemental payments are intended to provide sustaining reimbursement to those hospitals that serve disproportionate shares of the state's most vulnerable and medically needed patients, and to help ameliorate the significant underfunding of Medicaid hospital payments. These supplemental payments are targeted for reduction or complete elimination in the Governor and the Senate's 2009-2010 proposed budget. The cuts impact trauma centers, burn centers, academic medical centers, rural critical access hospitals, and by the way, the Moses Taylor healthcare system includes Mid-Valley Hospital in Peckville, Pennsylvania, which is a critical access hospital and would lose in excess of $200,000 by this one cut alone. Obstetrical and neonatal services, inpatient disproportionate share and outpatient disproportionate share payments, community access funds, and funds for medical and allied health education. Right now, we know that there is a substantial federal initiative underway in Washington to reform our healthcare system. We're all waiting for the outcome of that. Those of us that are in the provider community want to see this as much as anybody else. But we have to deal with the current reality of our system, how that system is structured, and how that system provides funding. And the reality is that Medicaid spending in Pennsylvania is such a large part of our state's economy that every Medicaid dollar that is eliminated has a multiplier effect of about 2.4 on the overall state economy. That is, every dollar that Medicaid doesn't get means $2.4 that some other aspect of the Pennsylvania economy loses. So in consideration, I would like to urge Representative Murphy and Representative Ken Smith and the legislature to please vote to restore the Medicaid cuts in the governor's budget. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you very much, Mike. And once again, that emphasizes the need to put forth matching funds, because if we don't put the state's share in, it has a negative impact on our medical system, it has a negative impact on our economy, and it has a negative end result in losing federal funds, which helps stimulate the quality of service and our economy. So I want to thank Michael very much for his testimony here today. And I'll be certain to share this with my colleagues down in Harrisburg. Okay. I believe that exhausts my list. Is that correct? Okay. If anyone else would like to address a concern, you could come up here. Just come on up, state your name, and we'll be happy to listen to your concerns. I don't know everyone here in this audience, but the woman who's going to address and share in this conversation here today and discuss some concerns is a councilwoman from Scranton, needs no introduction, Councilwoman Janet Evans. And Janet, you're welcome to speak from there, come up here, wherever you're most comfortable. Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Representative Murphy, I'm here representing the people of the city of Scranton, and I'm asking you to oppose any type of tax increase throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. As you well know, 25% of Scranton's property is non-taxable. It has been devoured by nonprofits. In addition to that, we have a very unique demographic, and you as a resident of the city of Scranton, I'm sure, are well aware of that. We have, indeed, a very high population of senior citizens, and approximately 24% of our city residents live at or below the poverty level. Residents of the city can ill afford a tax increase. And I'm asking that perhaps you and your colleagues would consider some of the following suggestions. And some of it I know that you and I have discussed as candidates for this very office. The legislature in itself is excessively large. And I will liken it to, let's say, the microcosm of the city of Scranton. The Scranton City Council is comprised of 5 council members. If we were to expand to, let us say, 20 or 21 council members representing the Plot, the Flats, Manuka, East Mountain, Upper South Side, Lower South Side, Upper Greenridge, Lower Greenridge, would that actually benefit the people of this city, or would it increase the costs of our local municipal government and in effect cause decision-making to be that much more stagnated? Now, in addition to reducing the size of the legislature, which I'm sure you know is excessively large in comparison to other states of our great nation who exceed our population, I think we should also seriously consider eliminating a flat tax and instituting a graduated tax. I also am very much in support of severance taxes against companies and industry, for example, like Marcellus Shale. Further, I don't believe that state government should continue in the, let us say, in the operation of the liquor industry within the state of Pennsylvania. And again, though economic development is certainly a boon throughout the state of Pennsylvania, perhaps moderation is in order in that area as well. Economic development, state-funded economic development has indeed been a boon, but it has been excessive throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And as a result, currently, and I'm sure you're very well aware, the city of Scranton faces, as we speak, 21 KOZ and KOEZ extensions, when the city of Scranton has not yet realized tax revenue from the first 10 and 13-year abatement that was granted. And I know that is another area of contention, but what I'm saying there is I think the Commonwealth would have been better served by creating a level playing field for all business that would actually create jobs while simultaneously assist the taxpayers. Because the taxpayers, particularly of our city, Representative Murphy, yours and mine, can ill afford what the governor is proposing at this time. And it's not my intention to deliberate on any of the fine nonprofit organizations who have presented to you today. Certainly they all have their purpose and their place in our society. But after all, it is the taxpayer who is funding everything throughout the state of Pennsylvania, and I believe there are ways in which cuts can be made that are not going to damage the least of our society, the disabled, the disadvantaged, the underprivileged, and the hard middle-class working families of the city of Scranton and the state of Pennsylvania. And so, in closing, I would say, once again, I'm representing the people of the city of Scranton, and we, the people, are asking you to keep us in mind. Many of our families are making no more than $30,000 a year. Fathers and mothers are working 2 jobs to feed their families, pay their bills, pay their mortgage, and prevent the city of Scranton from taking their homes for the inability to pay taxes. And I ask you, on their behalf, to consider them and to not further burden them with yet another tax increase. They've already suffered a 48% tax increase from Lackawanna County, which currently is running a deficit, a 25.6% tax increase from the administration of the city of Scranton, which is also running an annual deficit, a school board that probably increases taxes every 2 to 3 years within the city of Scranton. And now we're looking to you, our representative, to please consider the financial burdens of the people of our great city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. And as Councilwoman Evans mentioned, we've discussed many of these things in the past. We're in agreement on a lot of the issues that she brought forward here today. Many of the suggestions, and I appreciate the suggestions that you brought forward, because that's what we need more of. And I come up here from sitting at the table, not only because my back is a little bit sore and I wanted to stretch, but I also wanted to have a conversation with you, because that's what this is supposed to be. This forum here today is conversational in nature. The ideas that you'd raised about the economic development, and that's going to be an area that there's not going to be as much of. The KOZs that you had mentioned, and I've discussed this during my council days, and trust me, I know how difficult your job is as a council person in the city of Scranton. I've been there. It's very difficult. And KOZs, as long as if you get the benefit that was intended out of the implementation of that program, then it's fantastic. Because ideally, you're supposed to generate jobs, generate revenue for the city, get more people with with some money in their pocket to feed their families and be able to spend some money, to put some money back into the local economy so that we could prosper and that we could pay for the services we so desperately need. But what has happened, in particular in the city, developers have made money, taken local taxpayers off of the tax rolls, put them in situations where they're not currently paying taxes, further decreasing our city tax base. And I don't see the advantage to that. So in particular areas, and I think you always have to be sensitive. I know this is something that the governor is a big proponent of, these KOZs and the extended KOZs, but it has to make sense to me. And as far as this city and the state benefiting, economically as a result of the implementation of these programs, that I have to see that in black and white. And there's a study that's going to be done, I think, later this summer, that the House leader, Todd Aegis, when these KOZs were initially implemented, he wanted a cost-out study. Once they were done and once they were implemented, once the 7 years had run its course, what benefit that was to Pennsylvania, to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I haven't seen that yet. But on a local level, being a resident of the city of Scranton, I have not seen that benefit.
And I might add, yes, that is something that I think is missing and is absolutely required, a long-term study of the benefits and disadvantages of KOZs and KOEZ zones. And in addition to the average taxpayer assuming the tax burden of the business developer corporation who receives the KOZ or KOZ extension, it is also a deterrent to tax-paying businesses within the city of Scranton.
We're getting to that level playing field, right?
Well, not just
Because
the level
I think there
playing
should
field,
be.
but the fact of the matter is you can have a business, for example, who would have previously been paying, let us say, $10,000 to the city of Scranton in business privilege and mercantile taxes, who now would have a KOZ, a competitor, closely located to his business. That business, because they're paying no taxes, is able to undercut price-wise their competitor. And so now the city loses twice, because your original tax-paying business may now be paying the city $5,000 rather than $10,000. And then, of course, we have the new business that is enjoying the KOZ status for 10 years, and now possibly for 17 years. And anyone who may locate within, as you know, any one of those vacant spaces prior to December 31st, 2015 will receive an additional 10 years. And so it's very difficult to envision when all of this comes, reaches its closure, comes to a tax revenue fruition, if you will. And I just think that it could have been, as you said, I couldn't agree more, or say it better, it could have been a highly advantageous program had the state, let us say, designed it properly, in that maybe we need a rotational number of years. Are we going to be receiving an abatement for 2 years and then contributing to the tax rolls for 2 years? Or are we going to ask for a provision whereby a business receiving a KOZ, let us say, for a period of 6 years, will remain within the municipality for an additional 6 years, in which that business will be contributing to the tax base? But it is just certainly too loosely constructed, the KOZ program. And it certainly has not, in my opinion, produced yet the wide-ranging benefits. And before you can ask me as a local official, before the state can ask me as a local official to approve any type of extension in these instances, surely the state can understand that we would like to be able to examine and enjoy the benefits of their original proposal.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you. And I will assure you that any time that you and I, that you would like to discuss this with me, as you know, I'm open to discussion at any point. Yes. And if there's anything that we could work on together, myself, yourself, any local elected officials, or any state officials, to better language and different programs that we have available, that's our job. That's what we have to do, and we have to work together on those issues.
And Representative Murphy, just one last thing. I know I've taken far too much of your time and the audience.
We have no time limit at this meeting.
Well, I neglected to mention the Scranton State School for the Deaf, and I want you to know I'd like to go on record in support of that great educational institution, which has been the heart of our city, the heart of Greenridge, for well over 100 years.
And a close neighbor of yours.
And a very close neighbor of mine. You cannot put a price tag on education. You cannot put a price tag on the education of those with special needs. And rather than, again, balancing a state budget, looking for more walking around money, looking for more ways to finance, let us say, more economic development, more KOZs. Let's look for a way to keep the Scranton State School for the Deaf where it belongs, here in Scranton. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there were also some other things that Mrs. Evans had said with regard to the Marcellus Shale tax. That's something that's being discussed. That's something that is in the pipeline. Different corporate tax loopholes, eliminating those. That's also in the pipeline. Utilizing the rainy day fund in the from the state legislature, that's on the table. Any way that we could bring in revenues, and those revenues, as Mrs. Evans had mentioned, we have to always be mindful of the taxpayers here in the city of Scranton, and we have a really a high senior population. Some of the tax and one of the thresholds that the governor had mentioned with regard to his PIT tax would have been a family of 4 making less than $32,000 wouldn't have to pay the PIT tax. But there are other things. There are the Marcellus Shale issue and the tax loopholes. There's a lot of things to be considered, and I assure her and everyone in attendance here and watching on TV that those issues are on the table and they will be addressed. Do we have anyone else that would like to address our forum here today? Marge? Would you like to come up here, Marge?
Okay, well, no, I'm real good right here, Kevin.
Okay.
You kind of look good there, so I'm going to stay here. How's that?
Welcome.
Well, first of all, on behalf of our School for the Deaf, Kevin, as the president of the board of the Scranton State School for the Deaf, I want to thank you for everything you have done for us, carrying our message and being our advocate, because without you, we would have had no voice. And I want to thank Janet, because Janet has been with us. Thank you, Janet. It's good to see you today. And amen to everything you said, by the way, because that KOZ zone is a big issue in Luzerne County. I live in Wilkes-Barre, so you are right on about that. But you were there the day we had the rally. We all sat in the cold. Kevin did too. All of our, here's our students and our parents are here today. And I, some of them had an opportunity to speak. But I have to tell you that we're going to continue the fight. Continue your fight.
Very good.
Okay?
I'll applaud that.
We're with you. And we know what a great messenger you are. And I came today to want to thank you, because this is the only forum that has been made available to taxpayers and constituents. I came up from Luzerne County today because there has been nothing in Luzerne County to talk to anybody, and I'm sure somebody will now step up and do it. But it's important that our legislators hear how we feel about what's going on and how we don't like the budget that the governor has presented to us. There's one issue that I would like to bring to your attention.
Sure.
As a school board, on the Scranton State School for the Deaf Board, I serve as their president. But professionally, I'm a human resources director for a community mental health center. And I don't know if anybody has spoken today about the mental health budget and the intellectual disabilities budget, but it's 14, and I brought it from I know you've probably met with the Pennsylvania Community Providers Association already, Kevin, $14 million in cuts. Okay, not only does that mean our constituents, your constituents, our constituents, where I work is in Nanticoke and Hazleton, which is quite a bit of Luzerne County, but that means every constituent across the Commonwealth. And if anybody else can say this, it's true. Not only does that mean that these clients will not get served, but will also, you're talking about people losing their jobs too. So when you're looking at the budget, please keep in mind, and I know where we are, the Scranton State School for the Deaf, but keep in mind the mental health and the intellectual disabilities budget, because $14 million will be devastating to that budget, Kevin. So thank you. I know what a great messenger you are. So I brought this with my card.
I will
and
deliver that
I
message.
know the support you have in Harrisburg, because I've seen it firsthand. This is the legislative award that we got for the PCP this morning. And I'll give you my card, my business card. Thanks, Kevin.
Back over to the microphone. Thank you. Thank you very much, Marge. And during a discussion with Steve Corbett yesterday on his radio program, we had briefly discussed the cuts in the mental health programs, the $14 million. And I know there's a lot of people that don't understand mental health issues. There's a lot of ignorance with regards to mental health issues. And people don't realize if we don't invest money to improve the mental health of individuals, once again, we end up paying in the long run. We end up paying to incarcerate them. We end up paying for their health care in hospitals. And there is a ripple effect, as there is a ripple effect with a lot of different funding that we're going to have to consider over the next several weeks. These are our investments, you know, into our health and welfare. And they come, and if these investments aren't made, they create significant problems and significant financial burdens on all of us as Pennsylvanians. So that's something that is on my radar screen. It's something I'm very concerned with, and it's something I will discuss with my colleagues in Harrisburg. I didn't take an opportunity yet to thank Marywood College. I want to thank Marywood College for providing us with this forum to meet and discuss you know, your priorities, your budgetary priorities, your budgetary concerns, and it's through an open forum like this that other people who may not have been able to attend here today for whatever reasons. If it was Friday afternoon between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m., which may have presented a problem to a lot of people, but we tried to make the scope as broad as possible. We tried to invite anyone that would listen to this forum to discuss their concerns, so people home watching on TV could realize not only what our economic situation is here in Pennsylvania, but some of the problems we face and some of the social services and human services that need to be addressed. And it's not all human services. There's a lot of different things here discussed today, and they're all very important. But it gives everybody a better perspective on where we're at and where we're going to go as a Commonwealth, and what are going to be our priorities as legislators. But I'm going to have to listen, as I did today, and I'll continue to listen. I've heard testimony, I've taken notes, and your priorities and your concerns as Northeastern Pennsylvanians are my concerns that I will share with the legislature over the next several weeks. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank ECTV for televising this appropriations forum, this roundtable discussion here today. And most importantly, I want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you very much.